Welcome to WebEx. Enter your access code or meeting number followed by pound. If you're the host, save a phone number in your preferences to join the meeting as the host, or press pound now to join as an attendee. Enter your attendee ID number followed by pound.
We have a fire extinguisher in the back of the building. Can't be controlled. We'll go out these doors and go all the way to the back of this lot and meet up on the very back of this lot in the event of the fire. The great thing also is we've got the fire department 2 blocks away. So it doesn't take them long to get here at all. One other thing I did want to point out to any of you all that aren't familiar with this building is the restrooms are located right outside of this door here. If you go out and take an immediate left, that's our ADA restroom that a lot of times the women use because we don't have a women's restroom on this floor. But right around the corner from that, if you go out and then go right around the corner, there's an actual men's restroom there. So like I said, welcome. I hope you all enjoy it. And if you need anything, please don't hesitate to ask.
Thanks, Matt. Appreciate you being here to give us that briefing. Wanted to open it up to any of the task force members for any opening comments before we dive in. Mary, I see Mary's on as well. Welcome. Great.
Good afternoon. Looking forward to the presentations today.
All right. Thank you, Mary. Okay, so we'll start off with the first presentation. Will be Liz Presswood from MoDOT. She's going to go over the goals and strategies that we have been going through with the MoDOT statewide freight and rail plan. So Liz, thank you.
Thank you.
The floor is yours.
Good afternoon. I am Liz Presswood. I'm the Policy and Innovation Program Manager at MoDOT. And this meeting today is mostly focused around workforce, but we just wanted to take a step back and look at some of the work that MoDOT has been doing on our state and freight rail plans. So I'm just going to go over some of the goals and strategy and performance measures that we're looking at. Sorry, I got ahead of myself. So for the past 2 years or so, MoDOT has been working to develop our updated freight and rail plan. And this is the first time that we've integrated the two, freight and rail. So we're pretty excited about it. Like I said, it's been in development for about 2 years. It just went out for public comment this spring. We received 243 comments, and majority of those were of regards to passenger rail. So the comment period is now closed, but the draft plan is up on our website, and it's going to be going to the commission in the May meeting for formal adoption. So if you haven't had a chance yet, please go out and take a look on our website. There's a lot of really good resources. But today I'm just going to focus on kind of a high level of what are we going to define success? What are some of our strategies? How are we going to measure implementing this plan? So we started off with our safety meeting minute, and circling right back around, that's one of our top priorities. We have 3 primary pillars for safety, service, and stability. And this plan is revolving around these focused goals. So we're going to be looking at, as it relates to freight and rail, the moving of the Missourians safely, the customer service, innovations, reliability, managing our assets, stabilizing our resources, and building an overall prosperous economy for Missouri. So that really falls into some of the workforce development stuff that we're going to be talking about today. We've identified that the Missouri highway freight needs really revolve around the safety, technology, asset preservation, truck parking, which we've talked about a lot with this group, mobility and reliability, and then how do we design our network to accommodate our freight design? So again, taking another look at these three pillars and how it relates to the safety and security for our multimodal, the connectivity and mobility, the equity and environmental resiliency, coordination and collaboration, and then maintaining and the economic growth, competitiveness, and the innovation. So, oh, I think I just lost. Are we back? Nope, we're back. This seems to happen every time, Director. All right. It's like a flashback from our last meeting. Oh, and advanced without me. Here we go. So at MoDOT, we have a long tradition of keeping track of all of our data. We are data rich. We are just immersed in it. And there's a saying that if you don't measure it, you can't improve it. So every quarter at MoDOT, we go through what's called Project Tracker. And we take all of our data and we organize it and we measure it and we find out where we're succeeding and where we need to improve. And so we're going to take that same approach with this freight and rail plan of how do we measure it? What do we define as success? And where are the improvements that can be made? So we're going to be focusing on the network's supply utilization and condition, the travel time and congestion of our freight network, the overall safety of our commercial motor vehicles, what are the environmental impacts, and the economic and freight demand. So some of the performance measures for the maintenance is the percentage of the major highways in good condition, the percent of structurally deficient bridges on our national highway system that our freight network goes over, monitoring our safety and security, the number of commercial motor vehicle crashes and that are resulting in fatalities or serious injury, looking at our railroad crossings, our crashes and fatalities, and also the inspections on those railroad crossings. For our economic growth and competitiveness, this is, really falls into this meeting, the job growth, the port investments, and the port jobs. And these are all things that we track and measure. Finally, looking back at our connectivity and mobility, we're tracking our tonnage, the annual hours of truck delay, the reliability index, the river port volumes, unscheduled lock closure times, passenger rail ridership, and then finally our customer partnerships with railroad complaints and ridership satisfactions. So we're taking all of these and we've looked at them and we've kind of condensed it down into 4 multimodal strategies. And we have identified 49 implementable actions. And I'm not going to list off all 49 of you because that just sounds too much fun. But they are in the plan, and I encourage you to go into the plan and look at these implementable actions as it relates to the task force. Are we on the right track? Is there something that needs to be brought up to this level to kind of increase its importance for the supply chain of the task force? So we're just looking at the expanding of the Ag Coast, and we have the 4 strategies or the operation, program, policy, and outreach. So I'll just give you a couple of examples instead of listing off all 49 of them. So for expanding the Ag Coast, that's going to be things like improve the efficiency of the road and rail access to inland ports, support the public-private partnerships and opportunities that expand port capacity, and strengthen partnerships between MoDOT, state and local agencies and industry to identify site selection and opportunity for our shippers. And so that's for the Ag in the plan. So this is just an opportunity to kind of go the Missouri State Freight and Rail Plan of what are our goals, how are we defining success, and what are our strategies to implement this plan over the next 4 or 5 years. And then this group can take this information and does anything need to be elevated or fast-tracked through a 3-year task force?
Yeah, Liz, I think that's a really important point. It's a unique opportunity for this task force being called at the time that we have, while we're in the public comment period for the freight and rail plan, to create some alignment. So any task force members, member of the public, or others that would like to see greater emphasis in one area versus another. I know we did with the comments, we get a lot of comments, public comments on passenger rail. And honestly, with the overlay of the legislative session, the budget that's going on, members of the General Assembly certainly heard that. The governor's office heard that, and incorporated that into actions that have been taken in the last couple of weeks. The House in the budget process, the Missouri General Assembly, the House Budget Committee added $2.4 million in to extend passenger rail to go back to 2 trains a day. And just this week, the Senate affirmed that position. So that actually will not be a conferenceable item in the budget. That's great news. But again, just another example of what can happen when, all the policymakers and the information is coming together at the same time. So we should use this opportunity, I think, as task force members to make any recommendations or comments into the freight plan to the extent that we can align those efforts. These are the types of things that help us secure federal grants. We have things that are already identified in a formalized planning process. So it could be very helpful. And I want to thank Liz for bringing that to our attention, but also just to make everybody aware of that opportunity that we have before we button up that plan.
All right. Thank you very much. Any other questions or comments?
Any questions for Liz?
Thank you.
Great. Wonderful. Thanks, Liz. All right. Next up, we've got our task force member, Caitlin Murphy from Global Gateway Logistics is going to give us a presentation on the global supply chain issues. So thank you, Caitlin, for putting this together and for being willing to do this. So I'll give you the floor. Go right ahead. I think you're on mute. Oh. Not getting the sound through yet.
Can anybody hear me?
We can.
Okay.
Yeah.
There have been so many
jump
audio
over.
issues. So we missed a lot of what Liz was saying. It's just the audio keeps coming in and out. So hopefully you guys can hear me throughout the presentation.
You're good right now. Thank you.
Perfect. Okay. Okay. I don't see the presentation on my end. Do you guys?
You know what? Hey, you know what, Caitlin? We've got it now? Okay. It's the technical difficulties are my fault because I jumped over the first presentation. So I'll take full credit for
No
that.
worries.
Our team's forced to jump back and forth, but we do this as a training exercise too, to keep them on their toes. Thank you. Okay, Caitlin, go ahead, and Mr. Roberts, thanks for hanging with us. Okay.
Thank you, guys. Yes, and thanks for everyone on the IT side of it. I know it cannot be easy, so we appreciate you. Thank you, Director, and hello, everybody. I'm Caitlin Murphy, the CEO of Global Gateway Logistics. We are headquartered here in St. Louis, Missouri, but we actually work around the globe. And really, we're a freight forwarder and NVOCC, which we'll get into that. But our main role is to be the intermediary for global trade. And so I cannot move it, so I'm just going to have to ask that someone can move the slide. So a lot of people will question, well, what is a freight forwarder and what do they do? And you hear the term third-party logistics or 3PLs. And so I thought it would be necessary just to give a great, definition of such. So freight forwarders and third-party logistics companies arrange various transportation services, ocean, air freight, ground freight, rail, and they also assist with domestic and foreign customs clearance and documentation. And what's important to note is most freight forwarders, not all, but most freight forwarders and third-party logistics are non-asset based, which means that we don't own the trucks or the warehouses or the steamships. We are essentially going to those carriers, looking for the best routes, the best rates, and then compiling the entire transportation leg on behalf of our customers and facilitating all of the management of the shipment. Okay, there we go. So it didn't quite convert very well into this presentation. Having so many audio issues, I'm sorry, hang on. Okay, I had to call in because the video is not picking up sound, and so you might hear a little bit of echoing. But this slide is really just kind of going through the shipment journey. Again, it's not showing very clear on here. It didn't convert well, but essentially it's from the beginning to the end of a global shipment, a global import. I'm going to quickly go through it to kind of give you an idea of how many steps a freight forwarder is involved in for an import, in the case of this example, compared to, once the goods arrive at the last mile at the destination in St. Louis to deliver to a warehouse. So typically goods that become ready, in this example, we're using China to the US, goods are ready in China. We begin the shipment planning. We analyze rates, the requirements, preferences, customs requirements, and then we present what we believe is the estimated total cost to the customer. Once that's approved, a freight forwarder then arranges the pickups, the export documentation, export customs clearance if those services are needed, and then the shipment's loaded onto a vessel at an origin port, departs from a port in China, and then the goods arrive to the U.S. port of entry, which then is when we start the customs clearance process. And then customs clearance, once it's complete and any terminal fees have been paid and everything's arranged, the shipment's released from the port terminal, and then a ground transportation carrier is dispatched to recover that container from a local port or warehouse and deliver the goods to destination. Next slide, please. So today I want to quickly kind of go over how COVID-19 affected global shipping, mitigating the risk of that, and then the tactics to reduce risk going into the future. Next slide. So this is just a quick timeline. It's important to note because you can see how, the issues with global shipping have not stopped, even though, COVID numbers have gone down and there's less of a risk out there, getting rid of masks and things like that. It's still it's going to be a pretty long timeline actually until global shipping sees some sort of normalcy. So really what happened in the beginning of late 2019, early 2020, the factories started closing throughout China. We saw it firsthand at Global Gateway. It created a lot of issues because all the supply a lot of the time supply chains are pretty consistent, especially for imports into the United States. And when those factories closed, it put all of those purchase orders sort of in this bottleneck. So when China started to reopen, which was about March of 2020, is when the United States started to close down. There were blank sailings, which meant that a vessel essentially was due to sail from a foreign port in China to, let's say, Los Angeles, but essentially no one was able to receive their product, so they canceled bookings overseas, and carriers said, well, we're going to skip the sailing and move to the next week and see if we can fill up the vessels in next week. So it created a lot of blank sailings, lockdowns. U.S. importers shut down warehouses for months at a time. And then about May 2020 is when we started to see that U.S. companies were starting to reopen, operations were starting again, the orders that were placed overseas were starting to essentially become ready and get pushed out onto vessels. Well, that's about the same time, in about fall, I would say, of 2020, that ocean rates started to increase. And it wasn't an immediate increase overnight. It was gradual over several months. But as you started to see that the rates were increasing, there was less and less space becoming available, because you also had supply that was past due for almost a year. That was, these suppliers in China were extremely eager to get it out and get it loaded onto vessels. So carriers had more bookings than they've ever had at any point in time before. The supply was still the same in terms of the vessel steamships. So what kind of happened is law of supply and demand. So supply of vessels was down, demand for vessel space went up, and it skyrocketed the price. And in 2021, we really had to walk through that valley where ocean costs were rising at all-time highs. In some cases last year, in certain lanes that we had clients that were paying, you know, anywhere from, let's say, probably $2,000, around $2,000 to get a container to LA, had gone up to $20,000 at one point in 2021. And you have to think about, you know, it is such an incredible risk for these small businesses that are importing, because a lot of their margin is tied up in transportation costs, not in the product of their material being sold. So what was happening is a lot of these small businesses had to lay off a lot of employees just for capital, to keep capital running so that they could continue to order these global products. And, you know, the other difficult part of it was they couldn't shift easily and quickly to somewhere like Canada or Mexico for production. That usually takes, you know, anywhere from at least 6 months to a year to stabilize a supply chain. So they were really cornered into these regions of the world where shipping was the highest and the worst affected. So 2022, now we're more seeing a lot of issues on the U.S. terminal side of things. So, you know, we're still dealing with some volatility in ocean freight rates. For instance, right now, the port of Shanghai, even though it's open, the rest of Shanghai is closed. There's severe restrictions where if you're a truck driver outside of city limits of Shanghai, you can't bring a container into the city limits of Shanghai. And so even though the port's open, you can't facilitate trade very well. Bookings have gone down. So the rates have actually decreased. I would say they're anywhere between about $7,000 to $9,000 per 40-foot container right now to the West Coast. Still high, obviously much higher than the 2000 pre-pandemic rate, but a lot better than the 20,000. But now what we're seeing is this complete breakdown and suffering of U.S. port terminals. There's a lack of labor, severe lack of infrastructure. I mean, we are probably at least 10 years behind in terms of infrastructure to automate ports, so that if there is ever a labor issue, that there's a little bit more, I would say there's a little bit more movement in order to keep the cargo moving. We've dealt with a lot of ports where they've said, listen, we can't do a night gate out because we have half our staff that has COVID right now. So we're still dealing with that. We're dealing with extreme issues with detention and demurrage, which we'll talk about in a minute. Next slide, please. This is just a quick, you can go back and reference this. This is just sort of what I was explaining, this domino effect when Chinese manufacturing and Asia, to be very vague, when manufacturing closed and demand stopped, how imported containers really started to affect and condense and really, if there was a nucleus to the problem of the global supply chain, that is where I would definitely point it to. Next slide, please. I loved this image from TEPB Trade Market Update. I thought it was really pertinent. Again, you can go back and reference this. But it's really talking a lot about not just what happened in 2020 and the start of it, but what's really continued on through 2021 and even to now. So because there's increased dock times of these vessels, there's a lot of labor shortages. They have a lot of issues with longshoremen, the dwell time, so people are getting their cargo way later. There's a severe container shortage, which that's a bottleneck effect as well for cost on an importer, because if they don't have the ability to get a chassis to pull a container out by last free day, the steamship line is going to charge them. And just as a courtesy to a lot of our clients, we do freight bill audits. So we'll look at, if a competitor of ours is charging someone, let's say $30,000, which is very common for detention and demurrage, before they pay it, we say, let's really break it down and look at what the liability is and what your duty is in this, because we'll talk about it in a moment, but the federal government has really got involved because it's become such a severe issue. So this is just a really good slide again to summarize a lot of the global supply chain challenges, not just at the ports, but all throughout the world. Next slide, please. So equipment reduction. I want to switch for a minute and talk about exporters. We have been involved with exporting certain agriculture commodities, and I will say that they have really hurt the most from the equipment problem. So a lot of U.S. exporters, what they're struggling with is, one, they can't get bookings. So if you have a rice exporter in Missouri that they rely on the rail to get their loaded container of rice to Oakland or Long Beach, LA to get on a vessel, they can't even book that service with a freight forwarder because the freight forwarder can't book that service with the steamship lines. And what's happening is the steamship lines are saying, well, there's just not enough equipment in the local terminals. And so the exporters are facing issues with trying to get bookings. If they do get a booking, they're having severe issues trying to get container equipment, chassis, and then on top of it, they're dealing with a lot of rail delays, and then once it gets to the port of export, there's even more congestion that just stacks on top of it. And then importers, in terms of equipment, they have to deal a lot with what I just explained, the container issue at port, both pulling out a loaded import container for delivery, as well as trying to deliver an empty container to port, which is now becoming a huge problem. So an importer unloads, let's say somewhere in LA, and returns their container on time to the port. The port is now saying, sorry, we have no room to hold these containers. And what happens is the driver then has to take that container back to his yard. They're overflowing with volume and have no room. And on top of it, the steamship line is charging the importer every single day that that container doesn't get returned, even though the hands are tied behind the back, because when you go to return it, you can't actually return it. Again, there's not a solidified process for this from a national level. We internally have built process to mitigate that. But overall, I believe most likely with the Ocean Reform Act, I think the federal government's going to step in and start to lay down some groundwork for it, because it is such a nightmare and really costing a lot of these businesses daily. Next slide, please. So again, the cost, all the global supply chain issues, the costs that are really happening that are inflating transportation rates are the premium fees added to ocean base rates. There's no import ocean freight contracts for small to medium-sized enterprises. So what used to happen is we would be able to go to, so you have freight forwarders and NVOCCs, and an NVOCC is a non-vessel operating common carrier. And it's a separate license from the Federal Maritime Commission that allows us to directly contract with a steamship line and create our own bill of lading, along with taking on more liabilities for the ownership of the freight. Well, as an NVOCC, before the pandemic, we could go to the steamship lines and say, we have a great small business that does, 200 containers a year imported into Missouri, and they would give us a contract and say, okay, your contract rate to Missouri is, $4,000 a 40-foot for the next year. when the pandemic happened and the carriers were trying to figure out supply and demand issues, they sort of stopped contracts. And then in this past contracting season, we went back to those same carriers and said, hey, is it any better? Can we get any contracts? There's absolutely none available for small to medium-sized enterprise. And the threshold used to be about, you could get a contract around 50 TEUs or 20-foot container equivalents. Now, most carriers tell us, unless you have something around 5,000 20-foot containers, they won't even entertain a contract. And so you can only imagine how that hurts a small to medium-sized business that's trying to grow when all they want to do is forecast. And I have several Missouri clients that this is a direct issue for them. They cannot forecast transportation rate to sell a massive purchase order to someone like a TJ Maxx or Home Goods, where they have the business ready, but they cannot guarantee that transportation rate. And so therefore they have to turn down these opportunities. Some of the other additional costs, obviously like that example, loss of sales, detention and demurrage, like I just went over, and transloading and trucking. So right now it's gotten a little bit better, but there were a lot of times throughout 2021, the steamship lines have direct contracts with railroads to bring in import-export cargo on the rail to what we call IPI, which is inland point locations. They cut off that service, which left a lot of us to say to our clients, the only feasible option to get your cargo to Missouri is to transload it at a port and truck it. And that cost was, in some cases, almost about 5 times of what it would cost to rail those containers to Missouri. So we're seeing less of that, which is great, but it's a sacrifice between cost or time. So if an importer wants to use the rail, they're adding about a 3-week buffer for the rail congestion at East and West Coast ports. Next slide, please. This is just a great graphic to show you the inflation in just the one route of Asia to North America. And as you can see, it's an incredible increase, and it just keeps trending upwards. Next slide. So really, instead of kind of sitting idly by and waiting to see what happens, I wanted to kind of approach some really out-of-the-box solutions that we support as a firm. And so for us, it's all about the continuous effort. We don't think that there's one big player that's going to solve anything. Surely it's not just up to the federal government. It's going to be a all-hands-on-deck solution with lots of effort. Next slide, please. And on a side note, I love Winston Churchill, and so that's why I chose that quote. So, so in terms of taking action, so some things that I think the federal government can get involved in, and possibly the state at certain aspects. Really, for us, we look at what can the government do, and funding really becomes the forefront of it. So funding for infrastructure and build out of ports. So a lot of those examples that I gave you, can you only imagine if we had, if the container on vessel program was up and running right now, and those importers to Missouri were able to bypass all of that mess and bring it up into the river in their loaded containers, still from Asia, hop off at a local terminal and truck it to destination for a fraction of the cost. So definitely doing anything possible to support the infrastructure and port involvement. Improving the regulatory process. As you can tell, there's really no body that's governing any sort of regulations for the steamship lines, what they can and cannot bill out, the processes that they need to enforce, working with state and local bodies for temporary relief of congestion. So an idea with that would be, and it is more so related to West Coast ports on that note, but providing some partnerships with some local storage yards to be able to take some of these containers and take off that burden from importers. And then the Ocean Reform Act, supporting it, which if you go to the next slide, we'll kind of dig into that a little bit. So the Ocean Reform Act was brought forth to establish reciprocal trade to promote U.S. exports as part of the FMC's mission. It actually kind of expanded more to also assist U.S. imports as well. But it does start to, you're starting to see some formation of requirements around the ocean carriers to adhere to minimum service standards. So a lot of those canceled bookings or no bookings that are given to exporters right now, that is really going to affect that. It's going to hopefully help that and really allow for U.S. exporters to at least at a bare minimum, even if they're paying a much higher price, they're able to get their cargo moved. It's going to require ocean carriers and marine terminals to certify late fees or detention and demurrage. So demurrage is the fee that is charged if a loaded container stays too long inside a port. Detention is on the other side, so that is a fee charged by the steamship lines if a container has stayed outside of the terminal for too long. Typically, the minimum free days that an importer gets is about 4 days at port to pull the container and about 3 to 4 days outside of the port to unload it and deliver it back. But like you know, and I wish I had a figure for you as to the monstrosity that detention and demurrage has been in freight forwarding lately, but I would say on almost every single shipment, it's subject to detention and demurrage charges at some point. So at least that will start to put some regulatory verbiage around it and some penalties to it if the carriers or terminal operators don't adhere to it. So it's also big because it's going to shift burden of proof. So these carriers are going to have to listen to a lot of this data brought forth by the importers and exporters to say, listen, we tried to deliver that empty container. You didn't accept it. You need to waive these charges. And it's going to, it really will help. It'll help a lot with data as well, I think, for both the U.S. government as well as the state government, because it's going to require a lot of the common carriers to report import-export tonnage per vessel coming into the United States. Next slide, please. Just some ideas on rail service. You know, strengthening intermodal hubs to allow the rail to have a quick interchange between container on rail to truck transloading and vice versa. And government investment and support into equipment like chassis, secured storage yards, and then of course supporting the technology that comes along with all of it to really increase the time it takes for rail terminal operators to have to manage each container. For inland waterway, I've said this before, I think diversification of modes of transportation will always protect business. I think it is a matter of national security, in my opinion. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in the next few slides. But, you know, I think for the inland waterway, investment in the container on vessel programs, a lot what Mr. Lotrico was speaking about with APH at the last meeting, supporting a lot of those endeavors. Missouri Port Development Assistant Project, assistance to develop and repair infrastructure and improve the rail and road access to the waterways. I know Mary spoke a little bit about that previously, and we've had some other presenters talk about, you know, repairing the areas around the ports to ensure that there's a smooth flow of cargo. And then honestly, educating legislators of the need and significance of container on vessel to the region. Next slide. So something that I think is really interesting that's sort of flown under the radar right now, happening at more of a federal level, is something called the Revitalization Plan for U.S. Maritime Trade, Commerce, and Strategic Competition. So I'm going to break that down. So currently the U.S., we rank #1 in global naval capabilities, and we have for a very long time. But we actually rank 21st in commercial or merchant marine operations, which is really scary. Because as you've seen with COVID, we're now at the mercy of all of these foreign-owned ships to facilitate our global trade. And to me, it's a serious defense and national security risk as a nation. And we need to protect the United States in order to provide solutions to lessen supply chain disorder. And if you think about, you know, wartime, if we're if we are having, any sort of defense materials built overseas that are being carried on foreign vessel owner ships, you can imagine how there can absolutely be risk open up to disruption if they choose that they don't want to send product to us if we are, against them. So the Center for Ocean Policy and Economics and the Northeast Maritime Institute have proposed a revitalization plan to the government to deliver the direct solutions to those problems. Next slide. Some key elements of the plan, it's actually going to be a formation of the U.S. Virgin Islands, an open international ship registry, the first and only international U.S. open ship registry. It'll create a short sea transshipment hub in the Caribbean to alleviate supply chain congestion that we're experiencing, not just on the West Coast, but the East Coast as well. And it will also increase the number of ports and quantities of goods that we're able to move in and out of the U.S. region. It's going to build public, private, and international partnerships to address these issues, increase transparency, enforce legal and ethical standards, and it will establish and implement a green shipping strategy. So it's really focused in on the decarbonization of this new U.S. flagged fleet of ships. And it'll establish a maritime venture capital fund to finance advanced technologies and, any future disruptive, important modes of transportation and technology that are to come into the United States. And again, they're really focused in on the environment on those initiatives as well. And it's going to modernize the maritime workforce by giving state-of-the-art education and training tools in the U.S. and abroad. I believe Missouri has always been proactive in global supply chains. I actually moved from China back to Missouri because I believed that Missouri could be an incredible hub for global trade with a massive global footprint. And I still believe, with this task force and what the governor is doing, we're already being proactive and leading the charge and overcoming a lot of these supply chain risks, even just by starting to educate the public on some of these issues. But, we can also continue to work and further development and support of the inland waterway ports, attracting importers and exporters to utilize the Missouri region and all of our wealth of benefits, and support maritime initiatives that will strengthen U.S. as a global leader. And that is the end of my presentation. I'm open to any questions.
Hey, Caitlin, that was outstanding. Thanks for pulling all that information together and actually for your mastery of the subject in the business that you're in. So,
Sure.
I did have a question. One thing, actually, a little bit more news from the General Assembly this week. Along the lines of one of the things that you recommended that Missouri could do, a very significant increase in port investment was forwarded by the Senate this week in the budget process, Senate Appropriations Committee, to the $11.8 million that port investment that was running through our budget. Another 14 was added, brought it to 25 million, and then a specific investment for the Jefferson County Port of $25 million was added as well. So a total of $50 million for port investment. That is far and away the biggest port investment we've seen on an annual basis. We can see anywhere from 3 million to 10 million on an annual basis. So that's a very significant move. Those are conferenceable items. So anybody that knows anyone in the House on the Budget Committee might want to reach out and express, again, this is right in front of us, and something that will have an impact on everything we're talking about. The other, I did have a question about your comments with regard to investment at the federal level for maritime. Are you suggesting that there should be a U.S.-owned merchant fleet to help with this? So the government owning this, or more of a P3 where the venture capital makes it easier for private investments, so private owners to come in, or is it a combination of the two?
It's more the latter. It would be more making accessible. Of course, the federal government will regulate it, as it will be a U.S. These will be U.S. owned companies. But the beautiful thing about global ocean freight or maritime is, the more carriers, the more companies we can bring into the market, the more diversified the competition will become. And as we start to see like the aggregate of these alliances, they're all kind of charging the same amount. And so to me, as a freight forwarder, I just think in simple terms that if we had a U.S. merchant fleet that we could then, or commercial fleet that we could book containers on that were a fraction of the cost of what a foreign, ship owner was charging, that's really going to add some competition to the market and hopefully drive prices down for importers and exporters.
Great.
Thanks, Kelly.
And now I'm thinking I should give the House Budget Committee this presentation.
We can make that happen.
Caitlin, great presentation. I think there's a lot of neat stuff there to think about. And I think it helps kind of paint the picture in a way that is consumable for some of us who don't fully, as a great crash course, probably in a 4 or 6 year logistics degree course. So thank you for that. It was really remarkable.
Yeah.
Next, we have Greg Roberts. Greg is Vice President at Hilliard Industries. And as I introduced him earlier, he's also a member of our State Workforce Development Board. I'm excited to hear from Greg. We have a lot of great chats. Greg's got some really great ideas and perspectives, particularly as it relates to supply chain and labor supply issues across the country, but of course also from a Missouri lens. So Greg, we appreciate your time here this morning. Or afternoon.
Thank you. I'm not sure how I'm supposed to follow that last presentation, though. So just real quickly, as Dr. Leathers said, I'm Greg Roberts, Vice President of Human Resources for the Hilliard Companies. And so I'll give you a quick overview of Hilliard. So formed in 1907 in St. Joseph, Missouri. It's a Missouri corporation. We are now in 34 payroll states. We're a little different in our industry because most people in our industry, you either manufacture or you distribute. You don't do both. We do both. We have Hilliard Industries that manufactures the product, and we have Hilliard Inc. that sells the product, that distributes and sells the product. So we're a little unique in that situation. Our claim to fame is Newton Hilliard invented the gym floor finish. He seen a safety issue when they were using basically like a pine tar on the wood, and he said there's got to be a better way, a safer way, and he invented the gym floor finish right here in St. Joe, Missouri. The Hilliard family is actually in the Basketball Hall of Fame. They helped start the National Basketball Hall of Fame, and they've actually had a member on their board, and they had the first chair of the Basketball Hall of Fame, but they've been on the Basketball Hall of Fame board ever since, and we are in 5th generation of ownership at Hilliard. So with that being said, also, I did inspect the tornado shelter area. It's good. There is Hilliard soap and sanitizer there, good quality. It's not our paper towels, so I can't verify anything on the paper towels. It could be a lower quality. I'm not sure about that.
We'll look
So-
into those towels.
Yep, absolutely. We do have the Missouri contract as well, so it's the same. So I'm going to speak today about talent management, workforce, and supply chain management. It's kind of unusual. So like I said, Hilliard right now, we are in the process of building a new manufacturing and distribution center here in St. Joseph. We bought what was called the old Wyrope facility. It's 25 acres. The governor is coming up in about 30 days for kind of a groundbreaking ceremony. So interesting enough, when I was 20 and 21, I worked at Wyrope. I was a union steel worker. I made cables for Altec that's going to speak today. I helped actually manufacture the cables that were on those lifts. So it's kind of interesting that now we're going to actually have a facility there. So talent management, I think we have to look at with COVID and such, how do we look at the problems we have now and how do we not recreate those in the future. So the one thing we did as a company is we retained our employees and such. And at the time, I went to the company because we make hand sanitizer and soap products, and I'll get to that in just a minute. So we were making money, but we had employees who just couldn't do their job. We couldn't go sell equipment to a closed school district. They weren't using trash can liners and such. So at the time I went to the company, I just said, hey, listen, Hilliard always tries to do the right thing. And I just said, we need to do the right thing and we have to keep people employed. And so we did a few things where we reduced hours and shifted duties and some things, but didn't really understand what a brilliant suggestion that was, because nobody's seen this labor shortage coming. I mean, we knew the baby boomers were going to retire, but the positions that we kept that weren't working was service techs, working on equipment, some IT specialists and such jobs that if we had to go back and fill those today would be a struggle. And, you know, when you look at the wages, so like I said, one thing, parts of the business were non-existent for us, so we had to work through that. But schools were closed, customers were closed, we couldn't have access. So we had to shift to a lot of technology. And when we started looking at even the employment issue, I remember I went to the company and I said, we have to technology our way out of this. We've actually invested in some robotics and such, actually do some repetitive motion work that we used to have employees do that. And we've upscaled them and put them in more higher, like quality control and positions as well. So one thing we're also looking at, we were a corporation that we couldn't take any of the extra funding because of the way we were set up, our management control, but we are looking into this. It's an employee retention tax credit that they're actually offering, where we'll actually be able to recoup some payroll taxes that for the employees that we kept employed, that we can show that they were not productive. We couldn't actually utilize them. So, but you know, as far as talent management, we had to step back and we looked at job descriptions. We looked at expanded duties. We looked at market pay. And I think all the employers here can talk about market pay. And our employees are watching the Triumph bus drive around with $20 per hour advertised. We're all competing against each other. It's pretty incredible. Most of us have increased wages about 4 times in the last 12 to 18 months and such. So, but you know, when you look at market pay review, you look at 25, 50, and 75 percentile in the market. And we went into 2022 with a budgeted 3.2% pay increase for the employees. And we were thinking at the time, and you make those about mid-year. So mid-year 2021, we looked at a 3.2% pay increase. And at the end of February, that 3.2 has turned into 7%. So I imagine if the state had to come up with, you know, an extra 4% overall pay. But that's what we had to do. And when you look at warehouse labor has increased by 10%, the labor cost for that. And drivers, 13.5% over last year. So it's pretty incredible trying to retain employees. And when you go to hire someone new and what the market will bear, then you have to go back and you have to look at the employees that are already doing that job. And then you have to look at the manager or the supervisor who's supervising them and where's their pay. And so it never stops with that. So we've done market pay adjustments with new hires and current employees. We've increased vacation, added a holiday. We've done a lot of things. We were able to give our employees toilet tissue and sanitizer during the pandemic. And that was, they would think that was a cool thing. But, and when you look at the supply chain issues, I talked to our director of purchasing and I said to him, I don't understand what the problem is. And he said, well, there's not enough containers. And I said, but there was enough containers. How's there not? And he said, panic buying. And I think we all did that. We all ran out to the store and bought 3 months supply instead of a 2-week supply of certain things and such. So, but we've also done some things like total compensation statements, trying to make sure employees understand the total value of their employment, what their benefits are and such. And then, remote policy, we're all, when you go to hire somebody or when you post jobs, is it remote? Is it partial remote? Is remote local, remote distance? You have to do that. And then looking at the expense coverage for employees as well on that, because there's this legal term that a company should not be unjustly enriched. So if they're not using your internet in your facility, you shouldn't be unjustly enriched because that employee is utilizing their internet for your company and such. So all those things when you get into the legal aspects of remote work and such. So workforce development, we did remote work training for our employees and our managers. The hardest thing to do was to train managers to manage a remote employee. That was difficult. Let's see, regionalized jobs. We're used to where we would have customer service or credit in certain areas. We started centralizing those and having them cover multiple states. So as we've seen, we couldn't replace more people. We used technology and we expanded duties. We pulled a lot of jobs back into Missouri. Like I said, we're in 34 payroll states, but like credit collections, we can't, if we're not getting paid for what we sell, and when the pandemic happened, when you're selling to customers and they need their product, but they're not open, you're very concerned about getting your money and such. So we pulled credit collections into St. Joseph and expanded that department. Took our sales management out of it. Sales manager who is deciding to release an order that they're going to make a commission on, and we had to go, okay, no, we need to get paid. And so we took certain people out of that decision and brought those jobs into St. Joe. And that's actually one of the things we've done in the last 2 years is we've brought a lot of jobs back into St. Joe from other states. So purchasing, customer service, credit collections, and support positions we've brought here. Did career pathing for people so they could see where they're at now and where they can go, where the path would be. Skills technology training. And we did management leadership training through Missouri Enterprises and such during the pandemic. We tried to step up and say, hey, what do we have to do when we exit out of this? So supply chain management. When you look at that, if you look back in 2009, 2010, H1N1 happened. So the problem was we didn't make sanitizer in 2010 here in St. Joe. We bought it from someone else and then resold it. H1N1, that was actually a really good thing for us to happen because we couldn't get product during H1N1. And we stepped up as a company and we built a manufacturing facility and became our own supplier of hand sanitizer. And we're all sitting here now going, wow, if we wouldn't have pulled that back into Missouri and manufactured that locally, this thing where we would have been during COVID. So trying to supply people. One thing that it seemed like a good idea at the time, but in 2018, 2019, we started reducing inventory, trying to control costs, and we tried to reduce the number of vendors we buy from to have better relationships, buying power, and such. 2020, 2021, that didn't work out very well. So when those suppliers couldn't get us product and you're going out to another supplier, I think sometimes it's one of those things, oh, you love me now. So, and they're trying to supply their customers as well. So it's been difficult. I think we've learned from that to maybe we shouldn't have reduced the number of vendors that we needed to. Crazy enough, one of the hardest things for us to get was trash can liners. And we've always been impacted by the price of oil. When you look at all plastic products and the petroleum. But it's interesting following the last presentation, because I sat down with our procurement director and I said, I understand I'm involved in some of the supply chain issues, but he said to me, in 2019, a container coming from China cost $3,800. He said, today it is $40,000. And so after her presentation, I almost felt stupid saying that up here until I watched her presentation talking about the tenfold. A container coming from Europe used to cost $4,000. Now it costs $10,000. So, we've kind of really had to endure that. Let's see. I think so. Next, I'm going to move. I'm the chair of the workforce board for Northwest Missouri as well. So when you look at that, part of the problem is when you look at our current unemployment rate and such, we're at about a 3.4% unemployment in Northwest Missouri, and we have counties and such, they're at a 2% unemployment range. So we've used what's called an upscale, skill up program, and we are actually using information from people who are on public assistance because we know everyone that is capable of working is not working and such. And I can tell you for all the employers, having a career fair doesn't always work out very well because an Altech employee or a Triumph employee, when they have a table, they're not going to show up and come over to my table and talk to me about a job and such. So having large career fairs and stuff is not as easy to do. But we're using the public information, the public assistance information, and we're trying to reach out directly to those individuals, trying to get them back into the workforce and letting them know the training and the resources that are available to get them back into the region. We are having career fairs, and it's interesting. It's actually starting to loosen up. The labor market is starting to kind of loosen up. We're starting to see better candidates and such. And I can speak for all the employers trying to post jobs. It's quite a racket because you post a job and then they come back and they go, hey, for $5,000 or $10,000, we'll sponsor those and get them higher up and get them on people's phones and on their Facebook and everything else and such. So, and I think, as we look at the public workforce system, the career centers, and looking at the technology investment that we need to make that a viable option for employers to post jobs on. And, the younger generation that want to do things on their phone. And we're still dealing with a generation that still wants to come in and would love to have paper applications and such. But, we are now, we have people who won't eat at a restaurant if they can't order online and pay online. And we now have job seekers, if they can't do it online, if they can't do a chat feature. As a company, it's amazing the transition in technology that's happened even in the last 12 months. And the expectations of the customers, like I said, using chat features, using online customer service and stuff is incredible. And that's where we have to get as a Missouri workforce. And so, because it's free to employers, but the employers won't come if you don't have good product. If you don't have good applicants, they're not going to come. And the applicants aren't going to come if you don't have good employers there. And so, and I think part of that, like I said, is putting together a better product that the applicants and the employers both can come together. And so continuing to fund that. It's great to fund training, but truly the technology size, the infrastructure of workforce will help both ends of that spectrum. So, right now we're working on a new business in Albany, trying to help them find employees. We're working on apprenticeship programs. Right now, we're working on an apprenticeship program with Missouri Western for lab tech apprentices. Missouri's helped with a grant. It's actually changed. They're doing maintenance training as well here in town that several companies are taking advantage of and such. So there's programs out there, but once again, trying to find the employees and skill up the employees has been difficult. So, questions?
Thanks a lot, Greg. Questions from the task force?
Hey, Greg, thanks for the information.
Yep.
Actually, I have two questions. You talked a little bit about remote work through the pandemic, and I'm curious, is remote work a permanent part of your go-forward strategy, or is it just temporary?
No, it absolutely is. To the dismay of some people, I think it has to be. It's an expectation. If you're not offering remote options and such, I can tell you if there's a business you should be in right now, it's the laptop business. Because we found when March 13th hit of 2020 and we tried to send people home and we had desktops and such getting them home, we took pictures of different modems, sent this home and with people and said, circle which one you have, how many ports. We tried to make it as basic as possible because we moved their phones and their computers. So we're actually just finalizing a remote work policy, and we're going to have on-site. We're going to have remote flexible, which is about 75% in, remote part-time, 50%, remote local, because we need them to commute in, because when someone said, can people work remote? And I'm like, here or Phoenix? So I think that has to be a part of it. So we're doing, like I said, flexible, part-time, local, remote, distant, and then we have our field base. So we're categorizing all employees. Even the employees that really should probably work 5 days, giving them the opportunity to even 2 days a week work from home and such. With Microsoft Teams, which we're probably all using now and such, it's pretty easy, but you have to retain employees now.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. Thank you for sharing that. And the other question I had too is you mentioned that your driver wages had increased by roughly 13%.
13.5%. And I can tell you, like here in town, so we are our own DOT provider. So in fact, actually, we've added trucks and added drivers because there's so much work out there. Whether I should be saying this or not, we make over $1 million on backhaul every year and such. And we used to the fact that you ran legal and had good equipment, got you drivers. That doesn't matter anymore. And the fact that, you say, hey, we've been around 100 years, we're stable, that doesn't matter anymore for employees either and such. So we now have safety bonus. We have, it has to do with their gas usage and such, where how they drive and everything else. We have about 4 different pay structures on top of their base pay, which they get paid per mile, per stops, and everything else. Recruiting bonus, retention bonuses. That was one of the presentations I just did for them the other day. I showed them about 8 different ways we're paying them. So
With the 13%, what I'm curious to, and the other incentives that it sounds like you've added, I'm curious to understand what percentage of driving positions do you still have open or available, or have you been able to staff them with the pay increases alone that you've been able to implement?
It's a work in progress. I'll give you an example in Montana. We had a driver who made $21 and $22. We had 2 drivers. We were forced really to hire a $29 driver, and then we had to hire another $29 driver. So we had to go back and fix the pay of the other 2. And that was one of the ones I was talking about. We had to go back and look at the manager and the supervisor to say, okay, what are they making? Because when you go from 21 to $27, $28, and we do profit sharing, everything else. So it just adds up on everything. So,
Excellent.
but we still, I can tell you though, the driver issues and part of it, and it could be the marijuana issue, drug testing. I'll give you an example. We actually hired someone who Missouri paid to go through the DOT program. We didn't know that at the time, but we just hired him, and then he flunked a random drug test. And it was just, wow. But I can tell you, I was just in another state, and the Uber driver, I said, you do this full time? And he said, yes. He said, I used to be an over-the-road driver. And he said, now he said, I'm not bragging. He said, I made over $100,000 last year on Uber. Rents his car from Uber. And so he pays for that car within about a day and a half. He picked me up at 7:20 in the morning, and he had already been to the airport 6 times that morning. He said he's off by 2:00 every day, and he's home every night. So the competition of Uber and everything else out there, Lyft and everything else, is you wouldn't think that would affect an over-the-road driver, but it has. So,
Thank you, Greg.
yep.
Other questions from the task force? Caitlin, I think you're on mute, sorry.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. No, I was just going to say that thank you so much for that comment. I didn't actually ever consider Uber being a competitor to Workforce, but when you stated it like that, it makes sense. And I just wanted to say kudos to Hilliard for really diversifying strategies. I mean, you mentioned investing in technology to overcome some of the workforce challenges, and really diversifying your supply and nearshoring before most people had even thought of it. I just want to say kudos, because it's companies like that, especially in Missouri, that are really leading the pack with thinking outside of the box to overcome some of these challenges.
Thanks. One other thing I want to mention too, Missouri, they have a program. I'll pull it up here real quick. Wow, wow, I'm trying to think of the name of it. It's basically, instead of laying someone off, and I'm drawing a blank on the name of it.
Shared work.
Shared work, thank you, is where maybe someone goes from 5 days to 4 days, and so you're keeping them employed, and they could go out and file for partial unemployment. And that was really smart, really smart. And we're really getting to the point now where there's not enough incentive to stay home. We're getting to the other side of that finally, where people are going to be forced to go back to work. And, a lot of people went home and they just started living off savings. And that will be detrimental down the road. I guess they'll be in the workforce longer once they've spent their retirement money, unfortunately.
If the market still wants them at that point, right? So that
Well,
becomes a problem.
I was with someone, actually with the DED, Department of Economic Development, and she said, well, I think these older employees that went home, they'll be back in 2 or 3 years. And I said, well, the problem is when we've raised wages, we can't undo that,
Right.
and such. So I can tell you, employers and companies are really in a bind. We're getting hit. We have suppliers right now that have raised us probably 6 times, increased our prices 6 times in the last 18 months. We have some employers that we're their lifeblood. They're one of our vendors, and we know when they come and ask for a pay increase, a cost increase, they need it. Boxes used to be no difference in prices, and all of those are going up. We're attempting to pass those on to customers as much as we can, but we do a lot of state contracts, a lot of some places don't have the money to do that and such. So, yep. Thank you.
Thank you. That was fantastic. A lot of people don't realize, even at the governmental side, when everybody stopped driving there momentarily during the pandemic, we're funded by motor fuel taxes. So when we didn't have a floor on that in order to preserve the workforce, we went department-wide with shared work, working with the Department of Labor, and it ended up really working for us. We did it over a 12-week period, and we just took a 20% reduction in labor during that time. And because of the incentives that were out there on the federal level, our folks didn't lose anything financially. So it worked very well. You do have to diversify strategies across the board, but it's pretty clear to see why your company's been around for 100 years and will be continuing to thrive.
Thanks a lot, Greg. I want one comment and then actually 2 comments. One, you mentioned last week, we were in DC together last week, and, DC was thriving. There are people everywhere. Enough of you have been back, but, pandemic's over there for sure, just like it is here. But everywhere we went, it was, you didn't have a host or a hostess, you didn't have wait staff, and you didn't have a menu. Everything was QR code. You ordered it, and you paid for it off your phone. You ordered it off your phone. And you just think about that on the workforce side, how different that is. I talked to a few people there, and I was like, is this because you can't find talent? They're like, really, it's because our cost has gone up so much, and and we want to keep our menu costs as flat as we can, that we just can't afford to pay that staff, even if they could find that staff. So it's interesting. We're starting to see that pivot. I also appreciate the comments of, the thawing out of the labor market. We are starting to see some of the, last data we saw last week. The jobs report showed us that people are starting to come back. We're also seeing that savings rate, which had been really high for a while, to your point of living off the savings rate, starting to really decline. I think that's where people are realizing they got to come back. One last comment. You talk about remote work and the 8 different strategies that you have for workers. I think that unfortunately is the reality we're in now, and you can't wait that out. I talked to a lot of employers like, well, when's it just going to go back to normal? Well, it won't, right? In Missouri, we have 161,919 jobs open as of this morning. We get a report every day. It tells me that 7.6% of those are remote work jobs. That compares to 9.4% of all the jobs that are currently open across the United States. So it's still a small number, less than 10% nationally, 7.6% in Missouri, but it's creeping up, right? And it's starting to grow. And I think that's we're starting to see that movement happen. Thanks so much. So next we have Triumph Foods. I think that Greg was a little bit of a billboard for them, so we appreciate that. Josh Kleinlein. I hope I'm saying this right, Josh. Is he here or is he going to be online? Or are we going to move ahead? Oh, we're ahead of schedule. Okay, gotcha. I didn't realize wow, us early for a change. What's the? Well, then I'll yield to the big guy and let him decide how we dance on stage.
I'll go random again like I did to start the meeting. So, well, why don't we go next with waterborne commerce on the Missouri River with Bill Becker from Transport 360. Transport 360 is the port operator for both St. Joe Port and Port KC. And they've substantially increased the port tonnage moving through the St. Joseph Port, including wind farm parts that are otherwise shipped along rural highways. So, Mr. Becker, thank you so much for being here. I know you're extremely busy these days, so we appreciate you taking some time and joining us. That's right. That's right.
Thank you. My background, and I want to reflect on something Greg said earlier there. Managed Lifeline Foods for 9 years and managed a company over in Wathena that makes pelletized gypsum and lime and so forth. And we distribute that throughout the U.S. And we needed the logistical opportunities that the port had is how we got started. It spun into a subsidiary and now it's really a business of its own. And actually, you know, MK is a smaller portion of our business now at this point as we took on the port in Kansas City, but been involved in this region in management for quite some time and I've never seen anything like it on the workforce side. And there is this fear that I think we're just trading employees. Somebody gets a little disgruntled and they see something and there's opportunities that are almost too easy to job hop, but it'll work its way out. And you know, the 27 number, the 28 number on truck drivers is right where we're having to be here at the port. So, wanted to start out by talking about sort of our landscape with the Missouri River and what we have for opportunities and how it was designed, because in 1945, there was a River and Harbor Act that allocated funding to create what we currently know as the Missouri River system, the upper basin, lower basin. And it's all designed upon reserving water for gradual release to control those flows so we don't have flooding. Corps of Engineers has a lot of challenges and a lot of press sometimes. And what our opinion is they probably do a pretty good job because they're trying to please several constituents. I mean, you have the recreation, the freight, environmental, and agriculture, and sometimes they're on opposite ends of maybe a topic. So within that, it's important to note, though, that the credibility of the river flows is dependent somewhat on Mother Nature. So those dams clear up into Montana, Fort Peck, Garrison, and Owie, I think are like 75% of the total capacity of the river as they release that through Gavin's Point. When that was designed, it was actually designed with a thought in mind of about 5 million tons a year transferring in freight on the river. This graphic here shows you how it started out, starting in early 1960s, and it was actually ahead of schedule for quite some time. Got up to a certain level, then it fell below their graph. The top would have been the 5 million tons. And I think it peaked out in 1977 at about 3.3 million tons. The point I was making here within the capacity of the river is it was designed for 5 million tons, and we're currently well below that. So we're underutilized as an industry, and we have opportunity to grow that, considerable opportunity. This is a slide that I threw in of the Kansas City port from the early 70s, I believe, is when this was taken. To give you an idea, and I want to talk about infrastructure and the things that we need a little bit, because even though the river is pretty much the same, it needs some additional support from the Corps, and they're getting some funding for that. But some of the equipment there is a little different than some of the equipment we have today, which makes sense. Every other industry is changing also. But the capacity they had through the port at Kansas City when this picture was taken is probably 10 times what it is today. So our growth opportunities and our capacity, and it's the same river. So our capacity, our opportunities are really good. And we're actually, as an industry, we're quite bullish on what we have for opportunities. The big thing we have to watch though is credibility with our customer base, because we have to keep them confident that if they're involved and they're going to invest in this thing and they're going to grow, that we're going to be there. So why are we bullish on this thing? You know, we just talked about labor. We just talked fuel prices. A lot of different things are changing. The barge system, inter-river barge system here is about, I've seen all kinds of numbers. I've seen up to 9 times more efficient in terms of fuel consumption per ton. You know, we're using a number around 6 to 7, 2 to 2.5 times on rail. So whatever happens with fuel prices from this point, if it goes up, it's actually going to be more in our favor. It doesn't look like, with all the international things going on, it's going to go down in the immediate future. And the other thing to keep in mind is we're not necessarily competing with the trucking industry directly. The long haul stuff, yes, we are, but everything we move has to exit from the port to be distributed somewhere with a more than likely truck. We do some rail to barge. The other credibility thing is Mother Nature itself, and a lot of folks are of the mindset that, you know, it's dry this year, the river's going to be gone, we're not going to have any opportunities. It's hard to draw a trend line through that particular chart that goes clear back to, and this is off the Corps of Engineers data, they're back to 1898. As I see it anyway, I feel like, you know, it's just going to be variable. It's not going to be always consistent, but we really don't see a trend line downward where global warming or some other issue is causing the water to be less, at least in this situation. So all of these things are contributors to the confidence level that we have with our customer base. What's important there is we have to have, I think, for this system to work, public and private funds that support this growth, this opportunity. And some of those funds have to come from the customer base. If somebody's got a project that they want to do that's going to save some money, but they have to have confidence that if they're going to build infrastructure somewhere along the river, that it's going to be there, that they'll have the water supply and so forth. And for all the world, I've been involved in agriculture a large part of my life, so I understand that water comes and goes and you have to have it, but sometimes your customers don't. So one of the things that we're building is a model anyway as an industry is to offer certain pricing where we'll guarantee delivery, we'll guarantee a certain demurrage levels and so forth, and build that into our pricing so we have a little cushion, because it won't always work out. But large companies that have fertilizer, different products coming in, grain going out, what they don't like is surprises. They don't want to say, okay, we had this booked in at $22 a ton and now it's 28. What are we going to do about this? You know, or we don't want to do that again because we think. So if you could build it at $25 and they knew that's what it was going to be. So we're developing models with some of our customers where that's going to be a factor. But to do that, we have to continue to have a little more control over some of the processes, and I'm going to get into some of our plans regarding that. This fast for you. This is some infrastructure. You mentioned the wind turbine industry and where they were, and basically those wind turbines came in from overseas. They came into Houston. They had an option of being delivered by rail, but some of the components were too large for rail, too long for rail. By truck, individually, the cost was very, very high. So this particular infrastructure, and it's what I mentioned about it being different than maybe it was back in the 70s. Those pilings are 16-inch by 16-inch by 1-inch thick H-piles that are driven down to bedrock 75 feet below. coming up into this concrete structure, and those rebar are 1.25 rebar. They don't look like it from this view. So a very, very massive structure designed for heavy, heavy cranes. Then you pour 4 foot of concrete over that on a 35 by 35 pad, and you have two structures that are down to bedrock to control offloading of these major vessels that come in. So I mentioned the truckloads and how much saving it's not only the weight, but the size of some of these truck packages. In other words, these were 275 feet long. So you saw them going up and down the highway, but they got to come clear up across the country through, say from Houston or New Orleans. There's 30 of these on each vessel that comes up, and the river, even though it's winding and curvy, is still much, much larger. They have no issue whatsoever making through bridges and so forth. This is another thing. This is something that, with the support of MoDOT, we invested in this particular transloader. This is to offload grain, offload byproducts, and so forth. One of the things that we're looking at very heavily is, in the 70s, a lot of grain was marketed off the Missouri River, and it will continue to be so, I think, especially with some of the things happening internationally and our need to feed more of the world. But there's been a lot of processing over the last few years put in place. I mentioned Lifeline Foods earlier. They process a product called distiller's grains as a byproduct. AGP down here has a soybean meal. We're talking to people in Kansas City about those byproducts. So it's still grain, it's still an ag commodity, it still needs exported, but maybe it's a byproduct, and you're working with those same companies that perhaps took a little of the grain off the market for export back in the 70s when it started to slow down. This piece of equipment, we had our company, Transport 360, invested in it with support from MoDOT. But the advantage here, and again, this is different than the picture of the loader you would have seen from the 70s. This machine actually extends out 195 feet, but it's also on a radial movement. So barges are long, narrow vessels that are parked up alongside your dock. It'll reach out to that front hopper, come back in, and reach back out again as it goes on across. The advantage there is not just speed, but also safety. Missouri River has a flow around 7 to 8 miles per hour at times with logs in it and various things. If you can leave that barge tied off and load it right in place, it's much, much safer than trying to move it with winches and different things. So a major opportunity for us to continue to grow. The plans that we have and the plans that we think will bring back the Missouri River to where it needs to be are considering a fleeting hub in this Kansas City, St. Joseph area. It's ideal location. It's kind of where the river begins to dwindle a little bit going further north, and very similar to what they do on the Mississippi, but you can take a tow like this one or something in the order of 8 leaving St. Louis, or maybe 12, drop a couple off at Brunswick or somewhere like that, but bring them on into Kansas City. And we need a fleeting service, which is something we're looking at investing in, and have that fleeting service in Kansas City as a hub, so that now these can be not only distributed, but repackaged. So this larger towboat can come into Kansas City, moor these off, and then grab the 8 or 10 empties that have already been distributed within that fleeting service and head back to St. Louis, keeping that thing much more efficient. So we don't need a lot of these larger boats sitting around waiting for somebody to offload it and so forth. And the efficiencies there, when you put numbers to it, are phenomenal. And one of the things we're having trouble with is keeping power on the river because of those inefficiencies if we don't have the right amount of equipment. So a mooring service would look something like this. Now, this is something along the Mississippi, just a picture I had, but to give you a rough idea, and these probably a few more than we would have in a terminal or a hub here in this region, but that's the idea. You'd have opportunities then to distribute them within the various ports along this, between St. Joe, Kansas City, and there's 3 or 4 areas. And and have those ready to be packaged to go back. You'd have a smaller tow then working the northern regions. You know, Blenco spent 15 to 16 million, I think. And right now they're having problems with some transfer, but they'll get that fixed. There's a little area in the river north of Omaha that's giving them fits. But north of here, you really can't handle 8 to 10 in a tow. So then you repackage it, the smaller tug, smaller horsepower running the northern regions and keep this hub. The other really nice opportunity would be, and we're actually looking at an investment in a spud barge, which is a barge that has little, they call them spuds, but basically locked down beams that go down into the river to hold it in place so the flow doesn't move it any further. You still can tie it off, but you can operate off of those. And you see them a lot of the bridges and construction projects. This would be a situation where you could have multiple docks and multiple ports along the river, where you could have a conveyor on the spud barge, the offloader, and you can feed into those areas and create some additional opportunity without a lot of investment. It's pretty hard to read, so I'll try to help you. This is just basically from the Corps of Engineers, what's been transferred on the river past roughly 10 years. I think it's a little dated, but you know, we're looking at fertilizer around 20%. Grain is on about 25% on there. Very little, what you'd call machinery and heavy haul stuff, which we think with our projections, it's our 5-year for Kansas City and St. Joe, which is the 2 ports that we manage. We also have a small port at White Cloud, I might mention, but those 2 ports, from the customer base that we have, we're seeing a lot more interest in the heavy project load stuff. So you've got the wind turbines would be one example. There's other heavy projects that make a lot of sense. And it also is very beneficial, I think, to our road system to take those heavy hauls off of them and a lot less expense. We increased the byproducts quite a bit based on a lot of discussions. We think maybe iron and steel, actually, we reduced it a little as a percentage anyway. And actually in our projections, all these items went up. It's just the percentages changed around. Then this looks aggressive. You know, I'm showing basically everything below Kansas City, the Kansas City, St. Joe region, and everything above. So if you consider Kansas City as a hub, then we tried to analyze where we would be. But I think we're at, even with this in the 2027, we're just looking at a build out, we're still about a third of where they were in 77 at the peak, which is below what the Corps said they designed the river for. So we get some things going here, get this hub built like it should be to help the towing industry be more efficient. And obviously we'll get rain at some point in time. This is very doable. I mean, it looks aggressive, but it's actually very doable in our estimation and where we are in the customer base that we're talking to. So at the same time, you know, we have challenges. You know, we have customers right now that, you know, low water, they're having to build some of the tows a little bit lower than what maybe they would like to. In other words, your depth isn't quite as deep as it would be in the barge because the water levels are slightly lower. Those are passing things. And I think the Corps has a fair amount of budgeting available to ensure that the channel is at that 9-foot level going forward. So, any questions at all?
I really appreciate this conversation. On your last slide, just real quick, you know, to meet this aggressive goal and knowing that, I guess I'm kind of pleasantly surprised we have this much capacity out there. But what type of investment are we talking about? Like if we were able to say, listen, we're gonna meet this, we're gonna make this happen. What are we talking about? Do you have an idea?
Oh, I have a real good idea. We're pricing things.
I suspected.
And it's variable. You know, you don't need brand new equipment to be in a fleeting service because they're able to dock every evening. In other words, a fleeting service isn't like the guys on the regular towing services, for example, you know, they're gone for a long period of time. They got to stay on the river. They keep their crew. They have to have mechanics on board. They have to have cooks. They have to have all these things available. You know, I try to build this as you would as a conservative business person, I guess. You can hire someone who has an extensive amount of experience, but they want to be home every evening, you know, from a riverboat captain, for example. And so you probably get a little better economics in terms of who you bring on board for that. You don't need a day and night crew, so you don't need 6 people on that boat. You probably need 2 to 3. One of those 3 can be trained from one of our people that can help when they're transferring boats, and then the other 2 can manage then just moving it around. So the crew itself, actually, in some of these towing groups is one of the more expensive parts of the whole package. The boats themselves hold their value really well. A lot of boats on the river are in the 70s and 80s, you know, they're 50 years old, but they're still very serviceable. So I think we had budgeted about $850,000 for a towboat. You know, then you've got your crew and some training and things like that for just for that service. And then, you know, there's the problem of you don't start out where you want to be. So for some period of time, first 2 or 3 years, you probably do some additional services like back and forth to St. Louis to bring boats in and so forth. That piece, though, makes a big difference. You know, our company has invested about $3.5 million in the past 4 years, mostly in St. Joseph. We're starting to expand Kansas City now. And a lot of that, the way we do that, and goes back to the confidence with the customer base, because, you know, our shareholders are watching us too pretty close, right? So, you know, the customer base has to have the confidence to extend contracts to us that are relatively long-term, because if we're going to go buy a piece of equipment, you have to have like a 5-year agreement. Then based upon that agreement, we can go out and start to purchase this equipment that we need. And that's how that functions. Well, if the confidence level is low, that's challenging to get accomplished. So we're continuing to beat the drum for this opportunity, because the river is actually inexpensive, I think, means of transportation, something that I know there's maintenance items and so forth, but there's maintenance items on every form of transportation out there.
So I think maybe a silly question to you as an expert, but a lot of this stuff we hear, we have to build some infrastructure, we have to modernize infrastructure. We're talking about millions of dollars investment just to get it to today. But this, if I'm hearing this correctly, this is about some equipment, some staffing, and I mean, everything else is already in play.
Yeah.
That's just pretty remarkable, I think, in this world.
Yeah. I mean, there's work to be done on all these docks. There's work to be done on the river, but a lot of that's federal money that's already allocated. So, yeah, the biggest shame here would be to see the budget that the Corps has to ensure the channel, and then none of us are ready to use it, and we've lost the confidence level of the customer base, and so it sets. And there's a little bit of that chicken or the egg situation as to why we are where we are, I think. So the Corps maybe lost confidence because they didn't see the traffic. You know, traffic was below where they were, and then, you know, somebody's complaining the Corps is not keeping it up, and then pretty soon you're right there. So we're rather bullish based upon the economics that we've been discussing here today. It's a lot cheaper. And the thing I mentioned early on about building a relationship with the customer where you have to have some locked-in guaranteed pricing, that's critical too, because there's so many variables here. I mean, with a truckload that leaves a certain point, you got a pretty good idea when it's going to arrive and you can unload it. You know, this morning, how much fog were you guys in? You know, okay, they can't run those boats in that kind of fog. So all of a sudden now you're 6 hours later. They couldn't run during the night or what have you. So they said they'd be here Thursday morning, but they're here Friday afternoon, and everybody starts to get wired about, okay, where's the demurrage? We got to put something on that, especially till this thing really gets built out. Once you have the hub built in this region, you can start to control those things, because those major tows will come in and you have them here, you know when you're going to unload them.
Sounds like, You know, do you see further state investment here that could help facilitate this?
That's one of the reasons I'm here.
Yeah. You were really great about not leading with that.
Yeah,
I
I'll just
figured
be
I'd give you
honest
the
with you.
opportunity.
I'll go so far as to say it won't happen without state funding because
Sure.
it's too much. There's no proof of any of this in terms of absolute, how investors want to see things. And there's so many opportunities to invest today. Now, having said that, our investors have been pretty strongly supportive of it. Most of the investors that we have within our company are agriculture-based, strong folks and interested in the fertilizer aspects and that, but there's so much more here. Even, we've had a lot of this heavy haul opportunities and things come to us, especially since we put in those docks. So, but yeah, we're looking at accessing capital wherever we can. We think, though, the state has been the strongest partner we've had by far. We haven't been real lucky with federal money, but I think at some point here, we may be better off with some of the infrastructure bills and things. And I think the state can actually help us to access some of that. So.
I appreciate the presentation and your time. Thank you for being here. Probably get backwards now. That's right.
Well, thank you. I think now we'll go back to Triumph Foods and Josh Kleining. Right. Thanks for being flexible and pivoting with us, and great presentations. Floor is yours, gentlemen.
Perfect. Thank you. Good afternoon. As I understood say again? Oh. Okay. Perfect. As I understood the homework assignment, the job really was to effectively introduce who Triumph Foods was and to be able to speak to some of the challenges that we experience as we do business here in St. Joseph and specifically the state of Missouri. So we'll start off here with a pretty simple agenda, which is effectively what I just outlined there, which is first off, just going through our story. Who is Triumph Foods and what makes us really kind of tick and major exporter here from the state of Missouri. And then we want to walk through a number of different supply chain matters. And we'll really cover the entire gamut of supply chain issues, whether that be transportation type issues, inflationary pressures that we're experiencing, even some of the labor turmoil that we're currently going through. And then hopefully we'll allot a little bit of time for the question and answers that I'm sure you guys may have. As far as introductions of who we are, as you mentioned, my name is Josh Kleinlein. I'm the Chief Financial Officer of Triumph Foods. And the gentleman here to my right is Tom French. He is not Kevin Neal, as you can probably imagine by looking there. Kevin was unable to be here with us due to some pretty important personal matters that he had to deal with. And Tom is kind of his right-hand individual when it comes to HR matters, as well as some of our supply chain issues. So he's going to be perfect really to speak to a number of the issues that we want to talk about today. First off, who is Triumph Foods? If you're not familiar with the St. Joseph area, St. Joe has a very historic and proud background of hog processing and really just meat processing in general. This, as you can see here, is a fairly dated photo from a number of years back of really the Stockyards corridor in its heyday. You can see the Stockyards Exchange building there kind of in the middle, and you can see all really the pens there hosting a number of different live animals that would eventually be taken across the street where they can be processed in a number of those different facilities. Triumph Foods continues that tradition. As you can see with the arrow right there, we sit effectively catty corner to where the old Stockyards Exchange building still sits actually to this day. Here's a little bit of a more modern look of what Triumph Foods and what that area looks like today. You can still see off to the right there, the Stockyards Exchange building. And of course, you can see our very modern state-of-the-art 800,000 square foot processing facility there in the background. This picture is a little bit dated. If you would look at it today in the foreground, you'd see another facility, BHJ, as well as you'd see our bacon processing facility directly next to it, which is Daly's Premium Meats, which we will show you a picture of here in just a second. A little bit of background of who Triumph Foods is. We were organized in 2003, and it was really a vision of 5 different hog processors who were just simply looking to get further down the value chain. They came together in 2003 and formed Triumph Foods, eventually realizing their vision in 2006 when we began processing hogs out of that facility. We very quickly ramped up from a one-shift operation to a two-shift operation, where we currently process nearly 6 million hogs a year out of this one location here. That 6 million hogs a year makes up about 5% of the total U.S. pork processing. And if you just looked at the 5 producers as well, if you combine them into one group, they would make up the second largest hog processing group in the entire United States. You continue a little bit further down there, you may say, well, where can I see Triumph Foods in the grocery store? You won't see a Triumph Foods label in the grocery store. Rather, what you will see is you will see Prairie Fresh. Prairie Fresh is a label from Seaboard Corporation. Seaboard and Triumph Foods have a long-standing history with one another. There is no common ownership between the two groups. Seaboard Corporation is a publicly traded entity, but we have a sales and marketing relationship with them under which we sell everything under their label, and they market and retail all of that for us. Our facility hosts about 2,400 people. It's effectively a small city, and that's actually down, as we'll look at here in a few slides. Pre-pandemic, we were up almost near 3,000 employees. We have about $150 million in annual payroll, and we like to think that we're a pretty good steward to the local community and really just the state of Missouri and the other people that are doing business here. You can see a few of the statistics up there. You can see that we give back both monetarily to the local community, as well as we do give back a tremendous amount of our products to the food kitchens and others that are in need, as well as we like to believe that we have really uplifted the entire economy around here, as kind of in that Northwest Missouri corridor. Not counting any sort of hog purchases, we have about $115 million of vendor payments that we do on an annualized basis. Continuing to look at our ownership structure here, and this will give you a little bit of depiction of exactly what that strategic partnership with Seaboard looks like, as well as who our 5 owners are. You can see in the top right section there, the 5 owners: Christensen Farms, Honor, APC, New Fashion Pork, and Eichelberger Farms. Those 5 are the individuals, U.S. privately owned, who started Triumph Foods and continue to own and operate it to this day. On the other side of the chart, you see Seaboard Corporation, who owns Seaboard Foods. Again, we have a strategic sales and marketing relationship with them, no common ownership, but we do together have 3 joint ventures that are 50-50 owned between the two groups. Those ventures are Daly's Premium Meats, which is bacon processing. The latest facility that they have is here in St. Joseph, Missouri, right across the street, as I mentioned, from us. Then you see Seaboard Triumph Foods, which is effectively a mirror image processing facility of what you would see at Triumph Foods, only located in Sioux City, Iowa. And then the last one that you see up there, Seaboard de Mexico, is a ham boning processing plant down in Reynosa, Mexico. I hand this off to Tom to cover a couple slides here.
Thanks for having me, guys. Some continual investments in the St. Joe area, how we're giving back to the community and kind of adding value here. Josh already touched on one. It's a past venture that we have across the street from our pork facility. This is Daly's Bacon. It's not only been profitable, but it's a delicious investment as well. They had it, it's in the stores, go after it, it's delicious. Recently, for May 2nd, I believe, right, is the ribbon cutting for our latest kind of $10 million large project where we're expanding our EQ bays, which is where we hold our carcasses today. So if we have downtime issues today, we have a pull and push kind of system. If we have downtime, we have to shut the whole place down. This will allow us to have some freeway in case we have events like that. Also, we sort our carcasses for specific programs, kind of specialty one-off programs. This will allow us to sort and make have even more programs. One of our key programs that I mentioned here today, again, it's in the stores, is USA Prime. Pretty proud of this. This is the best of the best as far as quality goes. It's 10% of our carcasses today. It's a highly marbled product, as you can see here. Currently, our Prairie Fresh is our label. USA Prime is kind of an offshoot of that. This uses a technology that I can't really get into because it's a trade secret, but essentially it looks at the carcass before we've even opened it up, and it lets us know that this is a marbled, high quality carcass. We mark it, we sort it, and then we run it through 1 hour and box it and label it as USA Prime. So supply chain matters, kind of our show and tell. This is more getting into the nitty gritty of why we're here today. I'll go through some more facts and then I'll hand it back off to Josh to get into some of the issues we're seeing. As a daily importer, This is a little dated slide, but we have about 144 trucks per day that we bring in to bring our raw material, which is our hogs. Has about 155 hogs per truck today, and roughly about 300 pounds. It says 290, but they've gotten a little larger over time. So approximately 300 pounds. So we're having a lot of trucks coming in on 229 daily, about 150, 144, and going back out every day. Where those hogs come from, all around the Midwest. As you can see, we strategically placed our plant in the middle of where all our farms are. They come from Iowa, Minnesota, Kansas, Nebraska, and obviously here in Missouri as well. As a daily exporter, the two big players in Missouri are obviously Kansas City and St. Louis, but St. Joseph is number 3 on the list with $1 billion of revenue last year, export sales, I should say, last year in 2021. And what's interesting about that is Triumph Foods actually makes up 30% of St. Joseph's export volume at 400 million. So if we kind of pulled us out and had a standalone chart, we'd actually be competing with Springfield there for number 4 in the state of Missouri, which is a fun fact. And then if you take domestic sales as well outside of Missouri, we're roughly $1.5 billion in 2021. Supply chain challenges. What's funny when you say supply chain, about 5 years ago, you said that name. And if you're not in a business like ours, you wouldn't even really know what that is. Today, it's a major in colleges, and it's, headline news, right? You're hearing about inflation and how it's challenging Triumph is from a lead time standpoint. So, and inflation as well. But so when we order just our raw materials that we need, our packaging, our boxes, our corrugate, our steel, anything, motors, instead of it taking 2 to 3 weeks, now it's taking about 8 to 10 weeks, right? Lead times are our major problem. They've tripled right now. So what are we doing to combat that? We're holding more inventory. Inventory cost goes up, input cost goes up. You got to recover those somehow. Some of our critical parts are taking as much as 12 to 24 weeks. Those used to take 2 to 3 weeks. So we're having some issues there. And we actually recently, I laugh about it, but it's not really funny. We were trying to upgrade our wastewater system, and our preferred vendor came back to us and said, you have a lead time of 24 months, 2 years. I mean, how do we run a business doing that, right? So we're going to have to pivot and figure something else out because we can't run a business like that. Inflation, that's a term we're hearing everywhere today. Gas prices are up, so our freight costs are up 21%. We put all our product on pallets to move it around the system. That's doubled in cost. Packaging costs are up 40%, and insurance itself is up 20%. So we're having a lot of supply chain challenges from a cost component and just lead time. And so we're needing some help to try to combat some of those. Hand it back over to Josh.
What do you think of you mentioned that significant increase in insurance?
That's actually me. As far as that, so that's mostly our property insurance, which I think it's just the price of everything. Yeah. So your homeowner's insurance has likely gone up too, simply because the price of building, the price of lumber, all of those things have lifted that up. Continuing on, though, here with the Public Service Commission, and really just continuing on with that theme of inflation. I'm sure that you guys are all aware, as you kind of take a step back and look at 2022, though, you could almost say that, man, this is almost like a year of rate case being filed here by all of the public utilities, whether it's gas, whether it's energy, whether it's even our wastewater folks. There has been a number of different rate cases that have been filed so far in 2022. And really the point of this slide and inclusion here is that we're really reliant upon the Public Service Commission to be able to monitor those activities, be able to review exactly what is in those rate cases, and make sure that they are doing what is best for those individuals who are doing business here in the state of Missouri. Because if all of those rate cases go through, you can see the impacts that it would have on your local business community here, which is certainly no small task, especially in face of everything that Tom just mentioned. Labor challenges, and I understand my friends from Hilliard have already kind of introduced some of our yard signs and the things that are maybe around the community here. We are truly trying everything that we can to bring labor back into the industry. As I mentioned, right now we're sitting at about 2,400 employees. We were closer to 3,000 pre-pandemic. So we're roughly 500, maybe even 600 employees short of where we would ideally be. And we have truly tried, in my opinion, about everything that we could to bring those individuals back to the workforce. You see up there at the very top, it says, despite increases in starting wages from $16.25 an hour to $20 an hour. And again, that is our starting wages, and wages only go up from there. When you stop and you think about $20 an hour, that's straight out of college or straight out of high school, whatever that is literally starting at with overtime, $50,000 plus benefits easily. And they can easily make significantly more than that, given the amount of overtime that we do offer to our employees. We have employees that are making well in excess of six figures straight out of high school if they're willing to work hard and do those things. But even with all of that pressure and all of the advertisements that we have out there and everything that we are trying to do, we continue to struggle to bring people back to the workforce and to locate themselves here in the St. Joseph community. Some of the things that we are experiencing here, you can see up, even when we're bringing in just a couple of people from other communities and trying to relocate them. And we have a tremendous relocation package to try to incentivize them and allow them to be able to resettle here. They have tremendous difficulty being able to find both housing as well as daycare. Daycare, especially when it comes to our B shift employees and our C shift employees, those employees who are working kind of off normal hours. They find tremendous difficulty doing that, as that is a very limiting factor to them wanting to come and wanting to locate here. I can't tell you how many employees that we've actually successfully relocated here in terms of getting them to sign an offer letter, giving them the incentive package, and they've had to return back home because they could not find housing that was going to be a long-term fit for them. And that's extremely disappointing when we see those types of things happening. We've reached out to some local developers. We actually had meetings with the city and the chamber yesterday to try to talk about this issue. We're trying to partner with them in order to potentially do some private investment in some housing communities. We've talked about things from trailer parks to even getting outside of the norm and actually maybe even starting some container type home communities. So we're really trying to do everything that we can, but that is certainly a limiting factor as we do business here in the St. Joseph area. Transportation is another one. As you see there, the bus stop and just the lack of general public transportation. Of course, we have public transportation in the St. Joseph community, but it does not run at the ideal times and it does not run to the ideal locations of where our individuals are. So we employ people really kind of in 100-mile radius of here. That's who we're trying to really target as far as bringing employees, as far as bringing employees in. And so we're pulling people out of Kansas City, out of Leavenworth, out of a lot of the surrounding communities. And for the most part, there is limited to no transport available for those individuals. And when we look at that and trying to encourage and incentivize them to come here, they have kind of limited options unless they're willing to incur the gas prices for themselves. So again, we have tried private investment in this. We have tried to partner with those communities, but we've had limited really success in being able to solve that transportation riddle. Another one is the training. You know, one of the fun facts about St. Joe, and you can see this a number of different places, is that it is one of the best places for a manufacturing employee to locate. While it is great for the employee, it is extremely difficult for the employer, though, to compete in that market. They have so many different options in which they can go to and be able to work in this community. And so we have been trying to partner and encourage investments in Hilliards and high schools and in Missouri Western to really push them down some of those non-traditional paths, especially reminding everyone here that when you look at our jobs at $20 an hour starting wage, they don't necessarily need a four-year education to be a very successful individual and have a very good career and a very good life here in this area. They can come to work for us, start at that $20 an hour, and very quickly escalate into a supervisor or a general manager role where they can be making an even better living than what we previously described there. So trying to push them down some of those non-traditional pathways and encouraging those individuals to seek those opportunities is something that we really want to continue to invest in. The final one up here is immigration. When you think of the meat processing industry, it has always really embraced those immigrants. It is something that we really celebrate culture, we celebrate diversity, and for whatever reason, that has always been a natural pull for them to come into that meat industry. And perhaps it's because of, it is such high wages with really limited skills or limited things that they have to come in with. And so it is very appealing to those workers who are, perhaps transitory and coming into a new place to be able to settle down and really be a part of a community from day one. And right now we are working with a number of different groups, from Della Lamb out of Kansas City to Catholic Charities to a number of different, to try to bring in legal immigrants here, from Ukrainian refugees to, we even worked with the Afghan refugees and trying to do a lot of that, but we continue to meet with a number of different roadblocks. Even when we're talking about the Ukrainian refugees, while you see on the news that there's a tremendous need, despite all of our efforts, We haven't seen one individual come through Catholic Charities, come through the consulate, come through Della Lamb, and that's extremely disappointing. When we have so many jobs and so much opportunity for them to be able to come here, we would welcome and embrace them into our community. And so we really bring this forward just to say we need to continue to push both at the federal as well as at the state level for just some common sense immigration.
Before we move on, can I
Yeah, go ahead.
interject? This is obviously the slide that has me very excited. There's a lot here, and you guys have
There
definitely
is.
packed it. And clearly you have thought about just, the broader ecosystem around talent development. A couple questions, just when you say you're 500 employees short, I'm sure it's a wide range, but is there a majority of this we don't like to say unskilled, right? But
Yep.
is this skilled talent that's like maintenance and repair and machine operations and leadership? Or is this, working on the line? So
The overwhelming majority is going to be the union employees that are working online. But we truly experience this really kind of across the board. Specifically, when we think about the maintenance folks and some of our meat scientists who would handle the hogs out in the barns, you see up there on that last one, which I didn't touch on, the H-2B, or excuse me, the TN visa employees. What TN visa employees are, for those of you who are not familiar, this is actually a part of NAFTA where you can actually bring some individuals in through Mexico who have a college education, which are either meat science, or they're engineers, or they're some sort of a specialized skill. We've had tremendous problems going to that third one over there with getting some of those skilled workers that we've actually relied upon, bringing a number of those skilled workers out of Mexico. They come here on effectively 3-year visas, which you can renew for another term for another 3 years. So a 6-year visa in total. And we've had tremendous success, but we've had to rely again on bringing those individuals in from other places because the talent pool here is so limited.
We're aware also we haven't seen really the surge of Ukrainian refugees come. We have seen though a surge across the state, particularly on the east side of the state from Afghan refugees. Are you guys engaging? Are you seeing that population here?
Yep.
Yeah.
So the limiting factor there is
Yes.
pork processing.
Right, that's all right.
So we did reach out to them and we tried
Yep.
to make some accommodations,
Yep.
things that we felt were reasonable accommodations, but at the end of the day, it was not a perfect. fit
That's
for the
what we see too. And I'm looking at my 2 people who handle this, and I know that we're trying to find opportunities for a big group of people, frankly,
Yep.
that, and then the last thing I would just say, you said before you went to training, I heard the word train, and I thought, would it make sense to have a train that runs from Kansas City to St. Joe back, like an actual train, right? Which I know is a whole other story, and I'm not going to pretend that I know that. But the idea is, I know in the past, we've done busing from St. Joe before to Kansas City, and we've helped subsidize it on the workforce side. Those sorts of things, there's a need for it, but what we find often is when we invest in it, the employer agrees we need it, we might agree we need it, but then nobody shows up to get on we're shuttling empty shuttles back and forth. Do you guys, is it a matter of participation? And I don't know how we make that connection, I guess is my point.
I'm not sure how to solve the riddle, but I
Yeah.
can tell you that, and Tom could attest to this as well, that a number of our workforce that come out of the Kansas City area have really turned to kind of 15 passenger vans. And so they're really kind of commuting already and kind of taking, if you will, the transportation or the lack thereof kind of into their own hands and making sure that they're doing that communal-based transportation or commuting. We also see that a number of our employees have actually kind of spun off and actually started up kind of some of their own transportation businesses, both locally as well as between either Kansas City and Leavenworth and St. Joe. And so I believe that there is tremendous opportunity, but I'm not sure that I could solve the riddle as far as
Yeah.
exactly what that looks like.
Last question, and
Yep.
I'll let you back. Justice-involved individuals, we home plan, probably 10, 11,000 people a year. We're working on a pretty big expansion. There's a number of facilities up in this area that we're working with Department of Corrections. Do you see that as a population that you guys would be able to and interested in working with?
Yes, and Tom could speak to this probably better than what I could, but we run background checks obviously on everyone to make sure that obviously it's not a safety hazard to have them in our plants, around 2,500 people, with sharp knives and
Right.
other things that are taking place there. But assuming that the proper checks were done and everything, we've never shied away from anyone, whether it's immigrants, whether it's individuals who have had a hard time in the past. We are very welcoming and accepting of really all kinds of individuals.
Thank you for letting me interrupt there. It's a pretty big slide. Thank you.
Absolutely.
I'm
That really
gonna-
kind of sorry. That really transitions us away from necessarily issues that we're experiencing today and more just issues kind of as we look at the go forward of what we want to make sure is on individuals' radars here as they're making decisions kind of for the future. The first one that you see up here, and you may be very well aware of this issue, is really the 229 interchange and the double-decker bridge that runs along the St. Joe downtown corridor. Fun fact to this, my wife's grandfather was actually the engineer out of Rolla who designed this double-decker bridge. And while that might be a fun fact, I'm not sold that the double-decker is necessarily the right way to go. But what I can absolutely tell you is that we require major access into that Stockyards corridor. We have so many different trucks, and not just us, but as we look at Daly's Premium Meats across the road and really Allbaugh and everybody that's down there in that Stockyards corridor. What makes that a very successful area is because it has the barge, it has the rail, it has 36 highway, it has 229. It's very strategically located to being able to get all of our needs into our plant and back out. So as Tom alluded to, we have about 144 trucks that come in on a daily basis. About 70% of those trucks are coming in down that 229 corridor. Every one of those trucks that comes in, we have meat that's going right back out. And there's at least that many that are using 229 headed back out. And so as we look at that bridge and whatever the plans may be for either replacing that, bringing that down to grade level, we've heard going in through downtown, I can assure you that it needs to be a major highway that is running in and out of there, going north and south. We cannot have hogs in particular coming in and being able to go through our downtown corridor for a number of different reasons, including biosecurity. It's not healthy for the hogs to have that start and stop jostling going through downtown. And quite honestly, if we are trying to beautify or uplift our downtown, having 144 hog trucks coming through there on a daily basis is not what we want to do. So we just want to make sure that that's on everyone's radar and the need that truly is to the manufacturing community that is in that Stockyards corridor and really throughout the St. Joseph area. The other one, and this is very specific to the swine industry, is African swine fever. You may have heard this in the news. It is not something that is currently in the United States, knock on wood, but it is very similar, if you will, to kind of a COVID. It's a pandemic that is occurring throughout the hog population. It outbreaks in China. We've had outbreaks in Europe. Again, so far, nothing here in the United States. But if and when that was to occur in the United States, we want to make sure that there are some very common sense approaches to what would take place. The first thing that we want to make sure is understood is that at any given time when there is an outbreak, this is going to be really reliant upon the state vet to make a decision here, but we're going to have anywhere from maybe 6,000 to 7,000 hogs on the road. It is not healthy from a biosecurity or for the health of the animal to send them back to the farms. We need to make sure that those animals, whether they're from Iowa, Minnesota, where they're coming from, stay on the road and come to Triumph Foods to be processed. Now, we can decide what we do with the meat from there, but they need to reach their final destination. And then ultimately, we need to make sure that we have some very common sense approaches to what biosecurity looks like in continuing to allow the hog process and the hog flow in and out of the state of Missouri. The state of Missouri does not have enough hogs to continue to allow Triumph Foods to process. And because of our ownership structure, they need to be coming in from Iowa and southern Minnesota area. That's where the hogs really are located at here in the United States. And to avoid, really losing 5% of the pork consumed and processed here in the United States, we need to make sure that we have some common sense approaches to the way we treat this if and when we have an outbreak of ASF.
I presume that's been communicated with a lot of important people and it's on their radars.
It certainly has, yes.
One of the other kind of good news stories out of the Senate Appropriations Committee this week was we've been trying for many years, but the Senate Appropriations Committee just raised the operating assistance fund for transit providers for the first time in almost 25 years, and back to about 2020 level, 2000 levels. So they added another $7 million. It's a conferenceable item, but I think, your mention of some of the concerns for transit to your facilities and to your workers' homes, this could be an opportunity if that does go through to work with some of the local providers to maybe add a route or two or try to work with the local community to figure out these types of really important things. I mean, wouldn't that be something if you could draw in another 150, 200 people out of your need because you had the transportation you needed for them at a
that'd be
reasonable
fantastic.
price? So, good.
Hey,
I've
Josh.
got a quick question. Oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
Josh, I just had, hey,
Oh,
go ahead.
All right.
Go ahead.
It's hard when you're doing this remotely as far as timing. Okay, so quick question, for our guests, at our last, meeting, we had a presentation from a gentleman who was in the process of launching a container on vessel initiative up and down the inland waterway system. They are indicating that shipper savings could be about 30% in reduced transportation costs, and the duration or the time to ship those containers to places like the Kansas City area is essentially the same as if those containers were going into LA and railed to the St. Louis area. The question I have is, for your foreign exports, what types of volumes of foreign exports in terms of containerized cargo are you shipping out a year? And is this something you would be interested in talking to the folks with KC ports? Because they're also part of this process.
Yeah, absolutely. So first off, yes, we would be always interested in looking at a partnership and looking at better ways to enhance the way we do business today. I think Tom had a slide that alluded to that we do about 30% by volume of exports out of the United States. And that is about $400 million in total top line revenue that we do. Now, the limiting factor, but good to hear, would really be how quickly we could do that. Primarily today, we're taking it by truck out to LA, and it's getting on a vessel and going overseas. And it's going overseas primarily to the areas that you would probably think of, the China, going over to Japan, going over to a number of different places, and primarily different cuts and different types of meat that is not traditionally consumed here in the United States. The things like hams and loins, those stay in the United States, or at least stay in kind of the North America corridor, if you will. But we do send a tremendous amount overseas, and always interested in looking at other ways to do that. But again, it would really come down to making sure that the timing would work, because we have a limited shelf life, of course, on any product that we were sending, even if it is chilled or frozen. And so just wanting to make sure that we would partner there appropriately.
Okay, that sounds great. So I represent the St. Louis region, but based on your proximity to Kansas City, Port KC folks would probably be the best port to work with. And so afterwards, I'll get in contact with you and share some of that information and see if this is something, that's feasible.
Perfect.
Hey, Josh, going back to your slide about some of the supply chain challenges and the bullet that you noted around, the obvious continual increase in freight costs, but with limited carrier availability. What I'm curious to know is that, and I don't know your shipping model or understand exactly what you do, but did you find that making any adjustments to how you were sourcing capacity, for example, like maybe switching to drop and hook or doing something significant, enabled you to be able to secure more capacity than enough capacity to support your demand? Did you make any significant adjustments there?
We really haven't. So we've never come to a point where it's actually completely eradicated or prohibited us from being able to do our exports, even our foreign exports. Kind of going back to our strategic partnership that we have with Seaboard. Seaboard does our sales, marketing, and they actually do all of our freight and logistics. So myself and Tom probably couldn't speak at great detail about exactly how they do all of the logistics, but I can tell you we've never missed a load going out. Primarily what we're seeing is just some what I might call more like speed bumps in the road. So for instance, we do a tremendous amount of just shagging trucks down to NORAM cold storage, which is just down the street from us. And we've had difficulty finding drivers just to do some of those very limited things. And so actually, for instance, NORAM used to do all the shagging back and forth between us. And right now we're actually taking that on ourselves, and we're paying our own drivers to shag the trucks down. So there's been minor inconveniences, but nothing that has completely shut us down at this point.
Got it. Thank you.
Well, it's great. Terrific presentation. Really appreciate what you're doing for the region and the state. And it's a great story. And I think the challenges that you mentioned are ones that are helpful for us to hear. And we'll try to incorporate some of that into our report and the work that we're doing as a task force. Thank you.
Thank you for your time.
Really appreciate it. So next up, we're going to get into distribution and packaging. And we've got Corey Shu from BMS Logistics, and I believe Lonnie Welter as well. So gentlemen, welcome. BMS Logistics is a packaging, warehousing, and distribution facility. Really appreciate you gentlemen being here today, and look forward to your presentation.
Yeah, thank you for having us here today. There are more people than I thought was going to be here. Appreciate the invite to come and talk to you about this. We represent BMS Logistics, as you said, and Wright Packing, both here in St. Joseph, headquartered out of St. Joe. And BMS is a contract packager for the most part with warehousing and some fulfillment business. Wright Pack is mainly a custom blend in the agriculture farm, and then also we do some consumer pest control products like that. So not sure how to start this off the best way. Do you guys ask questions? Do you want us to talk a little bit about the slides?
Yeah, I think if you run us through, and then we'll open it up, but certainly anybody can jump in while we're going.
Sure.
Yeah.
There we go. So BMS is, like I said, they're headquartered here in town. We've been in St. Joseph since 1986 when it was founded. Today we have 16 facilities located in really 3 geographical locations in St. Joe, Kansas City, and Lincoln, and in Allentown area. And so we have, amongst all those locations, 346 employees, and then about that many more in full-time equivalent temporary. So we have the temporary employees for the ups and downs that go in the cycle. Mostly it's up, so they really are mainly full-time, but we have that ability. So the 4 pillars we have within this company are contract packaging, which is the main thing that we do. And then beyond that, we offer some merchandising displays, warehousing, which is just kind of part and parcel with doing this kind of business, and then fulfillment distribution. Direction. All right. Locations that I mentioned were, we have one in Kansas City that's what, about 5 years old now, maybe 4. St. Joseph, we had 10 locations. In Nebraska, we have 2, and in Allentown, 3 locations. And in total, we have, among those 16 facilities, we cover about 2.8 million square feet of buildings. Contract packaging that we do, there's mainly one large customer. We have a few smaller ones that we do. We have full and automated systems. And actually, that's why I have Lonnie here. He's an operations manager who can explain, he's our COO, actually, who can explain the automated process if there's any questions there. But we have automated and semi-automated manual lines that we utilize. And then the merchandising displays are the displays, full pallet displays, things you see in caps and things at Sam's and places like that I'm sure everybody has seen. Warehousing is general warehousing that we do. And fulfillment distribution is something that we've been getting into, kind of niche work. It's not Amazon. We're not Amazon, but we do that kind of work on a smaller scale. Wright Pack. Wright Pack is a company that we're associated with. It's actually common ownership in this. And so it was founded in 1991. We have 3 facilities all in the St. Joe area. There's 100+ employees and about another 40 full-time temporary workers that, again, that are mainly full-time and throughout the year. The main thing that Wright Pack does is custom blending and filling. So we're handling home and garden pesticides. And through that, we have 3 main categories, I guess: powders, granules, liquids, and feeds. And so the powders and granules you'll see in lawn and garden fertilizers, household pesticides. A lot of these are brands you'd probably recognize when you go to Home Home Depot or Lowe's. And we have some fairly large customers that we do the contract manufacturing for. Liquids, mainly this is dealing with farm animals, topical insecticides that we would go on cows and horses and things, and then the animal repellents for deer, mole, and gopher. And then we have the feeds that are the backyard chickens, which seems to be very popular over the last couple of years, and seen an uptick in that business. Horse treats, feed additives that would go in with cows and swine, things like that. So that's what we do between those two companies.
Well, it's great. Could you maybe describe for us a little bit of the challenges that you've had in the last couple of years with the pandemic and now what's going on? Are you seeing problems both on the workforce side and with your logistics business? Are you getting, having problems with the supply chain, things that you want to bring to our attention?
We talk about the people side, and the last couple of years, I'm sure it's been the case with everybody, is we've struggled mightily. Particularly, 2020 wasn't as bad, although we were dealing with all the distancing rules and all that made it kind of difficult for us to do the work that we do. Later that year and then into 21, we were really struggling finding people. A lot of it probably due to some of the incentives that were out there for people that they didn't have to work, a lot of people staying home and all that. But we did work our way through that. We still had a lot of demand for our services. And so that didn't help as we were struggling with people and still having a demand from our customers. And so we did the best we could there. We were able to manage through it. And I think we worked through it probably for the most part. We still have some struggling now, just probably in this area as much as anything, just because of the workforce availability that's out there. There are people that put in our workforce, there's only so many of them with all the companies that are looking for them. In terms of the supply chain, I don't know, Lonnie, if you want to field that question.
I'd like to back up for just a second. Corey did a good job explaining our labor force, but when COVID, I hate to use the word COVID, but we have to sometimes. When COVID first hit, our first concern was we're going to be considered an essential business, right? That's the first thing we wanted to hear. Thankfully, we were. From there, as Corey said, 2020 wasn't so bad on us. Our customer demands went up, and we're typically, in the past, we've always been that attempt to hire company. We would contract with staffing companies to bring us the labor force. They worked their hours. We would hire them on directly. That pretty much dried up at the end of 20 and beginning of 2021. So we made a conscious effort to get into direct hiring. So we had incentives. We went to job fairs, advertisements. We did everything we could to just get people to come look at our company and give us a look to see if we could bring them on. Through that, we discovered that maybe our starting wages need to be adjusted a little bit to entice people, to give us a stronger look. We did that through the 20 and 21. And I guess I'm pretty happy to say, as we sit here right now, our labor force is probably about as best it's been in a long time. St. Joe, in my opinion, was the last to recover for our company anyway. Out in Pennsylvania, we have 3 locations out there. That one healed up pretty quick. Our one in Lincoln healed up pretty quick, but at least in this town, it took them a little bit to get going. But in the last 4 months, we're fully staffed. So we're proud of that. As far as the supply chain goes, we're not really big players. We're recipients of it. A lot of the customers that we have take care of their own freight, broker their own companies. We just receive the product in, warehouse it, do fulfillment with it, and then ship it back out. Lead times have gone up, in my opinion, on average, probably 4, maybe 5 more weeks than what there normally would have been, which makes companies like us carry larger inventories and do some other things to adjust for that. But I think for the most part, it's going to be one of the last puzzle pieces I think will need to be fixed for us to get what I call back to normal.
On that, we have Right Pack Company is more of a turnkey business, and so we carry a lot of inventory. And over the last year and a half, we probably carried about 20 to 30% more inventory than we normally would, so that we can cover those lead times and make sure that we have product for our customers. And then on top of that, some of the supply chain issues they have in getting that out of our warehouse, just builds it up into our space, and to where we've had to need additional space in order to keep it. So carrying extra inventory, both from the raw material side and the finished goods side, we've been handling both ends of that.
Most of the raw materials that you've got coming in, are they mostly domestic, or do you have international component as well?
I'd say probably most of it is domestic. We do have a fair amount of product coming in from China and from over in Europe, and we are having issues. Probably not so much getting it over here, it's just getting it to us. It's sitting in the port somewhere, particularly on the East Coast. It's, on the cost. And getting it to us, it might hit port and sit there for 4 or 5 weeks.
Said that's mostly coming from the East Coast, because a lot of what we've heard from some of our panelists and others in the last few months has been primarily focused on the West Coast port issue. So it's interesting to hear that similar concern.
We probably carry enough inventory to help us through that.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, but by the time we're needing it, it's gotten to us, but it probably should have been there, a couple months before.
Sure.
Appreciate the comments about how, Missouri was maybe your last one to catch up. I'm curious maybe to unpack that a little bit, if you don't mind. Like, what was it you thought about Missouri, and what in particular took it to Pennsylvania, Nebraska, looking at a few other locations? Just curious kind of what those other states were able to do, or was it just society?
It's a good question. And we ask ourselves that question quite a bit. What are we doing wrong to get people to come work for us? I don't know if it was the state as much it was maybe just our region here. Because in our Kansas City location, we really never even had a labor problem to the magnitude we have in our other locations. So I don't hate to say the state of Missouri was the reason behind it, but I think locally, I still can't figure out where all the workers went in some days, but they are coming back, which is really what we needed.
Any other questions? Well, gentlemen, thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Really appreciate hearing that. Yep. Thank you. Thank you. Well, just wanted to open this up for any public comments. Anybody here from the public that'd like to make any comments, you're welcome to do so at this time.
I have to put you on the spot, Mike, but if you were interested after hearing anything today, say anything, you're more than welcome. Okay.
All right. Thank you.
Tech, thank you. Watch 5 people do that. I don't know why I would ever catch on. Yeah. Again, Mike Moore with Altec, and a couple of different things bring me here today. Of course, Altec and supply chain, I probably couldn't add anything new to what you heard here today. It's very similar. Some of the challenges. More recently, I've been involved in workforce development, or trying to get involved a little bit, and specifically around, I'll say, the trucking industry. My role today is in engineering, but I deal with chassis. So almost everything Altec builds goes on top of the truck. And so we have a very close relationship with many companies in that we need technicians that know how to keep trucks on the road. And so one of the great things I've heard is that some of the things we're considering doing as Altec to support workforce development in the area of heavy and medium duty trucks will benefit so many companies and in so many areas. And so in one regard, we need people to help us build our product, but in another regard, we need healthy dealerships that can help us keep those trucks going as we build them. We need to know that there are infrastructure improvements to keep the trucks moving. Drive-away service is a big part of what we do. And so it's interesting to hear maybe some of the alternatives that might happen, perhaps on the water, for example. So, yeah, I would just say that appreciate the time today, and Altec is committed to helping in the area of workforce development. The one other thing I would add that we didn't talk much about today, but there is, we believe, a change coming with electric work trucks, right? So I think in the coming years, I'll share with you, for example, Altec believes that by 2026, 5% of the trucks we build on are going to be battery electric, all electric. And so things like infrastructure and charging stations and parking and it's a really exciting time to be involved in this. But I would just kind of offer the committee to keep an eye on that too, because I think that's coming. Our customers in the electric utility industry in particular are interested in it for their fleets because obviously they make electricity, right? And so there's a big interest there, but I think there's going to be great opportunities to take a look at that at the state level too, and how that changes, our look on the highways. So.
I really appreciate that comment about EV because 2026 is not far away.
Correct.
We've heard a lot, I think, about that, but to hear, a company in Missouri that's manufacturing and doing a lot of assembly work and understanding that, what you're going to be working with will also be, I think is incredible. If I could, maybe just one more step with this, your experience, you guys are all across the Southeast and everywhere from my understanding. Experience with other states. Is anyone doing it yet? Is anyone ahead of it? Are we all behind as far as getting in front of this EV issue? Or do you see out there where like, wow, this is the model, which means our production might shift to follow this model because that becomes a competitive disadvantage for Missouri if that's the case.
Yeah. I would say that as you might expect, some of the people that are ahead of us are on the coast. And so California in particular, they have an organization called California Air Resource Board, and they are driving a lot of what's going on. And so companies, chassis OEMs, trucking companies have kind of responded. And so I think you'll see their infrastructure, charging station availability, that sort of thing, incentives to get into a battery electric are probably ahead of really most of the rest of the country. I think New York, New Jersey, those folks are probably ahead of us a little bit too, but not by as much as California. And so I think for most of the country, we're pretty typical, but it's going to be interesting. I will share with you that work trucks like we build, bucket trucks, by the way, that's what Altec does. We sell to, Evergy and folks like that helps keep the lights on. I would share with you that we're probably behind more of the delivery. So I think you're going to see a lot of electric vehicles start in short run delivery companies. So, things like beer distributors and food and snack distributors, right? Because those trucks have typically a fairly limited range and they need to be home at night to be charged with today's current technology. And so I think work trucks will be a little later adopters. We're getting into it now, but I think you'll see a lot more of them with regard to those short haul runs. And I would share that the technology that seems to be really under the quickest development is how do we electrify some of the over-the-road fleets. And so you'll see OEMs, I think major truck OEMs come out with electric offerings for over the highway. So that's going to be where we're going to have to look at, hey, rest stops, different truck stops with different charging, stations and acreage to handle it and that kind of thing. So, yeah.
One question I have for you real quick on the topic, and to follow Dr. Leather's comment, a lot of education, it seems like, is still needed in this area. There's the obvious benefits from a sustainability standpoint, but one of the things that seems like is a little bit of a mystery to me, at least, is is there any data that supports the cost of ownership differences in a light truck that is operated by fossil fuels versus an electric vehicle?
There is, and I think it looks like a lot more attractive investment today than it did when gas was, $2. I think the primary driver right now are electrification goals. So, for example, with utility companies, there's a trade organization called Edison Electric Institute, who has challenged all investor-owned utilities to set a target for electrification, and they've responded with some pretty aggressive goals. And so, for example, by number of vehicles, 50% of their fleet electrified by 2030 is a pretty common goal in the industry. Now, this will include, every Nissan Leaf, every Ford F-150 Lightning, but they really can't make those type of goals unless we electrify some of the work trucks. So that's kind of the state we're in now. So I think that the dollars will always have to be looked at closely. The initial acquisition cost is high right now, especially for work trucks. But I'd say most of the activity now is driven by people being asked to do it from kind of an executive level, sometimes a government level like CARB, right? Diesel emissions are getting to be very, very hard to meet, let's put it that way. So I think that's the primary driver right now. Good news is I've driven some of these things, and I can tell you they run great. I mean, they have power, they're quiet, they don't smoke. I mean, so there's some really user benefits to them too, but I think we'll have to watch closely, cost and payback.
Yeah, and I appreciate that perspective. And I work with a truckload carrier, and our focus is continuing to be how do we be a better partner of the environment, of course, and electric vehicles is a natural path there. But then our second largest expense is fuel. And so you think about in your way, how much is the cost of a potential, not just the upfront cost of the vehicle, but the cost of ownership, like maintenance and all those things that are associated. And so when you start weighing that out, and if you think about, there's a lot of cost savings for major fleets if they go down the electrical path, it becomes attractive real quick to try to eliminate a lot of that fuel expense. So I appreciate the context.
Yeah, and maintenance is one of those areas where an EV can shine because think about not having that complicated diesel engine. And in today's modern trucks, all of the super complex after treatment emission systems that are on them, it's quite a machine. And battery electric vehicles, to really simplify it, there's a battery and there's an electric motor and you go. So that really simplified it, by the way. There's somewhere there's an EV technician not happy with me, but yeah, thanks for the chance.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate it. Thanks for bringing up that topic. I mean, one of the things that we always, being on the kind of owner operator side of the equation, the things that you drive on, I think a lot of these pricing models are being built in without an expectation that there's necessarily going to be a charge for the use of the infrastructure so that we can upgrade, maintain it, all of that. So I think some of the models are going to be a little tweaked over the next few years as we try to work that out. I mean, there are many different opinions of that. We don't want to stifle the industry, but you'll have to build a lot of four-wheel drive capacity into them if we don't have the ability to maintain the highways. So, really great topics today, and I would say we're getting more efficient as we're going. So, right through them, and I appreciate that. The topics were excellent. The presentations were excellent. Special thanks to Caitlin for presenting as well as a task force member and pulling all that information together and sharing it with us. Really get us off with some good questions, and the topics were great. It's nice to highlight some of the workforce challenges by Missouri-based businesses, and that's really helpful. We are going to be meeting again in Hannibal, and let's get a date there somewhere, May 7th. And we're somewhat starting, we're in draft mode now. And what we want to be able to do is we're getting out some draft materials in the next couple weeks to task force members for feedback and comments on some of the initial chapters that we're looking at. And just so that the task force members are aware, what we're trying to do is probably by, we want to have a public comment period with a draft that's available for the public to comment on. We need to have that, I would say, completed in the month of May and ready to get out early in June, so that we have a public comment period. We do have a deadline by the executive order for the end of June for submittal of our report. So it's a pretty tight timeline, but we do have a lot of information to sift through, and we're doing that. So really appreciate the task force for the work that you've already done, and for that's coming. But we are in that place where now it's time to put the pen to paper and get some of this outlined. I think we've got a good basis for a lot of the work that's ahead of us, and to try to make good essentially information available for policymakers to make informed policy here. I just want to, before we wrap up, I want to make sure I give an opportunity to any of the task force members that have any comments. Good. Mary, Caitlin? No? Okay. Well, thank you very much. Thank you very much. So we will see everybody in Hannibal on May 7th. Take care.